In the heart of the great and ancient city of Cairo, near the famous Khan el-Khalili market, lived a man whose life was defined by the craft of tailoring. This modest but respected establishment belonged to a man named Syed, known throughout the district for his meticulous stitching and, more importantly, for his profound patience and fairness. Syed was the father of 3 sons, a fact that was both his greatest joy and his deepest, most persistent source of worry. For many years, Syed had worked tirelessly, stitching robes for merchants and travelers, ensuring that his family, while not wealthy, never knew true hunger. His wife, Fatima, was a woman of equal kindness and simple virtue, the quiet pillar of their humble home, which was located just above the shop. Syed's sons, however, possessed vastly different natures, despite being raised under the same roof. The eldest was named Omar. Omar was a man of strong ambition, but his ambition was poisoned by sharp greed and overwhelming avarice. He saw only the value of money and the immediate gains it could provide, despising the honest, slow labor that his father valued. He was constantly impatient, seeking quick routes to riches, often criticizing his father's slow, honorable trade. The second son was Salim. Salim was much like Omar, though perhaps slightly less driven by pure malice and more by simple, deep-seated envy. He envied the wealth of the great merchants who passed their shop and held a resentful belief that he was owed a grander life than the one fate had assigned him. Both Omar and Salim spent their time plotting how they might escape the tailor's life, contributing little to the shop's daily labor. The youngest son was Judar. Judar was the exact opposite of his 2 older brothers. He possessed a tranquil heart, immense patience, and an almost unnatural kindness that drew people to him. He was deeply respectful of his father and mother and worked diligently in the shop, learning the trade not for the money, but for the craft itself. He was content with his simple lot, believing that contentment was a treasure far exceeding gold. He was beloved by his parents, but constantly mocked and bullied by Omar and Salim, who viewed his kindness as weakness and his humility as foolishness. Life continued in this strained balance until a great and sorrowful change came upon their house. Syed, the foundation of the family, fell gravely ill. His strength failed him rapidly, and he was soon confined to his bed in the small living quarters above the shop, attended tirelessly by his devoted wife Fatima and his gentle son Judar. Omar and Salim, though they visited their father, spoke more often in hushed, calculating tones about the inevitable future, the distribution of the family inheritance. As Syed felt the cool shadow of death approaching, he gathered his 3 sons around his bedside one final time. He spoke in a voice weakened by illness, yet firm with the clarity of a wise man's last counsel. "My sons," Syed whispered, his frail hand reaching for theirs. "I'll leave you all I possess, this small shop, the tools, and the home above it. It is not a fortune, but it is enough for honest work. I have divided my goods into 4 equal portions. 1 portion for your mother, Fatima, and 1 portion for each of you, my 3 sons." He looked into Judar's kind eyes and then slowly, deliberately, turned his gaze to Omar and Salim. "Judar," he continued, focusing on his youngest, "be true to your heart, my son. Your kindness is a wealth that no gold can buy. Omar, Salim, I implore you, honor your mother and treat your youngest brother with fairness. Greed is a desert that drinks the spirit whole. Do not let avarice divide what blood is bound." With these final profound words of advice and warning, the good tailor Syed closed his eyes and passed peacefully away. A great sorrow instantly descended upon Fatima and Judar, who wept openly, mourning the loss of a beloved father and a righteous man. However, Omar and Salim did not weep. Within minutes of their father's last breath, their grief was consumed entirely by the frantic, burning necessity of securing their share of the inheritance. They cast cold, impatient glances at the grieving Judar, eager to begin the immediate division of the assets, already plotting how they might manipulate the partition to their greater advantage. The test of the father's final warning began the very moment his soul departed. The seeds of discord, long sown by greed, were now ready to bear bitter fruit. The honest tailor was gone, and the three brothers were about to discover that an inheritance is rarely just money, but often a mirror reflecting the deepest truths of the soul. Within the house, the atmosphere changed instantly from deep sorrow to cold calculation the moment the tailor Sayed was laid to rest. The promises the dying father had sought were instantly forgotten, and the bond of brotherhood snapped under the pressure of avarice. Omar and Salim, barely waiting for the standard days of mourning to pass, insisted on the immediate division of the inheritance, pushing aside their mother Fatima and their younger brother Judar. Omar, using the aggressive confidence of the eldest, took charge of the partition. Sayed's estate consisted mainly of the small but valuable house and shop, a collection of high-quality tools necessary for the tailoring craft, a small amount of liquid gold saved over a lifetime, and various bolts of expensive cloth. Omar and Salim quickly conspired to use Judar's well-known modesty and his sincere grief against him. They approached him with false smiles, masking their inner contempt for his sorrow. Brother Judar, Omar began, his voice dripping with forced kindness. We must divide our father's assets according to his will. You are the finest tailor among us. Your skill is already legendary in this neighborhood. Therefore, it is only right that you keep the core of the business. Salim quickly added, playing the role of the reasonable mediator. Yes, Judar. Take the shop and all the precious tools, the needles, the shears, the measuring sticks, as these are the means by which you earn your honest living. Omar and I, who are eager to travel and establish new trade routes, will take the gold, the liquid coin, and the bolts of valuable silk. We need the traveling capital, while you need the reliable structure of the shop. This proposal was entirely fraudulent. The house and tools required immediate maintenance and cash investment to turn a profit, while the liquid gold and silk bolts represented the immediate spendable wealth. The elder brothers were demanding the capital, while leaving Judar with the liquid assets, and the sole responsibility of caring for their mother, Fatima. Judar, whose mind was still shrouded in grief, and who was genuinely naive concerning the calculating nature of wealth, readily agreed. His only desire was to honor his father by preserving the shop and his memory. I accept, Judar replied simply. The shop and the tools are my father's legacy, and I shall maintain them. I only ask that you promise to always honor our mother and assist her when she needs aid. Omar and Salim exchanged triumphant, covert glances. They readily offered their hollow promises to Fatima, who watched the whole transaction with a growing, cold dread, already sensing the profound betrayal. With the assets legally divided, the true nature of Omar and Salim was immediately revealed. They sold the bolts of expensive silk and exchanged the gold coins for a large sum of easily portable currency. Within days, they packed their bags. They did not inform Fatima or Judar of their destination, offering vague, boastful promises about returning as wealthy pashas. They spoke no words of comfort to their mother, offered no support to Judar, and left Cairo without a backward glance, severing the ties of blood completely. The seeds of avarice had fully blossomed into cruel abandonment. Judar and Fatima were left alone in the now silent house. Though they owned a shop, they had virtually no liquid funds to purchase new cloth or sustain themselves during the inevitable slow periods of trade. The shock of the rapid division and their son's heartless departure left Fatima heartbroken and physically frail. Judar bravely tried to resume the business, opening the shop every morning and sitting down at his father's old workstation. But the absence of capital was a crippling obstacle. He possessed the skill and the devotion, but without fabric to stitch or coins to pay for thread, the honest trade began to wither quickly. The tailor's shop, which had been a symbol of stability, soon became a silent monument to the family's painful division. Judar quickly realized that his brothers had not merely been greedy, they had deliberately left him and their mother to struggle alone against the rising tide of poverty. The good fortune promised by an inheritance had turned into a desperate fight for daily bread. The hardships faced by Judar and his mother, Fatima, intensified with the cruel swiftness of a desert storm. The fine, expensive tools left to Judar by his late father, Syed, now lay silent in the workshop, serving only as bitter reminders of the successful trade they could not practice. Without capital to purchase new materials, the shop's doors remained mostly closed. The meager savings they possessed were quickly depleted, spent on simple necessities like thread and oil for the lamps, far too little to feed them both adequately. Fatima, still recovering from the profound grief caused by her husband's death and the shock of her elder son's callous abandonment, grew visibly weaker. Judar watched his mother suffer, and the sight was a greater agony to him than any hunger he might feel himself. His quiet, inherent goodness prohibited him from complaining, yet the weight of his responsibility became unbearable. He understood that relying solely on the hope of a tailoring customer was no longer a path to survival. He needed immediate hard coin. Swallowing his pride, a pride rooted in his family's honorable craft, Judar made the difficult decision to seek manual labor. He closed the tailor shop entirely, leaving his mother alone with the promise of a swift return, and went to the busiest quarter of Cairo, the harbor district where goods were unloaded from the mighty Nile riverboats. He stood near the docks, offering his strong young back for hire as a simple porter or a common loader. This work was difficult and humiliating for a skilled craftsman. Day after day, Judar labored under heavy burdens, sacks of grain, bales of silk, chests of foreign goods, earning only the smallest, most meager wages. The rough, demanding work stripped the softness from his hands, replacing it with calluses, yet his spirit remained unbroken. He used every single copper coin he earned to buy the cheapest food available, ensuring his mother received the largest portion. One late afternoon, as Judar stood exhausted near the main archway of the dockyard, wiping the sweat and dust from his brow, he was approached by a man unlike any local merchant. This stranger was tall and lean, dressed in foreign robes of deep violet and black, adorned with strange, shining embroidery that spoke of lands far beyond Egypt. His eyes, set deep beneath a large turban, were remarkably sharp and seemed to hold an unnatural, intense focus, observing the world with cold, almost magical calculation. The stranger did not negotiate with the other, rougher porters. He walked directly toward Judar, ignoring the calls of the other men eager for work. "Young man," the stranger's voice was low and resonant, carrying a faint, melodic accent Judar had never heard before. "Are you a man of courage as well as strength? Are you willing to undertake a task that requires absolute silence, unyielding loyalty, and heart free from fear?" Judar, surprised by the direct address and the strange nature of the questions, instantly perceived that this was no ordinary merchant seeking to move bales of cotton. He immediately thought of his suffering mother and the desperate state of his finances. "Sir," Judar replied, standing tall despite his exhaustion, "I am a man of honor, and I will undertake any task that does not violate my faith or my conscience. If the reward is sufficient to sustain my mother, I am yours to command." The stranger smiled, a thin, mysterious movement of his lips that did not quite reach his intense eyes. "The reward is more than sufficient, young Judar. It is a fortune that will elevate you and your mother far above the needs of this city for all your remaining years. My name is Tawfiq," the stranger announced, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "and I am a man of knowledge. I have traveled far to find a specific type of helper, a man who is both poor and pure of heart. Your brothers, the greedy Omar and Salim, though they crossed my path, were unworthy. You, however, possess the virtue I require. I offer you an adventure that will change your destiny forever, but you must vow absolute secrecy until our task is complete." Judar, astonished and slightly afraid, looked at the stranger's piercing gaze. The man's words, mentioning his greedy brothers and promising instant, unimaginable wealth, sounded like a dream or a profound trap. Yet, the desperation of his mother's hunger outweighed his fear. "I swear by my father's memory, Tawfiq," Judar declared firmly, bowing his head. "I am your servant. Tell me what I must do, and I will do it without question or complaint." Tawfiq's smile widened, cold and triumphant. He knew he had found the perfect, unsuspecting instrument for his magical purpose. The time for the quiet misery of Cairo was over. The magical quest was about to begin. The contract between Judar and the mysterious stranger Tawfiq was sealed not by a written scroll, but by a shared look of necessity and ambition. Tawfiq, satisfied with Judar's oath of loyalty and silence, immediately began to issue instructions with the absolute authority of a master preparing for a delicate magical operation. "Good, Judar," Tawfiq said, slipping a small, heavy purse of silver coins into the young man's hand. "This is but a fraction of what awaits you, but it must serve two purposes. First, take it to your noble mother, Fatima. Tell her you have found steady, well-paying work that will keep you away for some time, but assure her that she will lack nothing. Second, use the rest to purchase essential supplies. I require the best rope, specifically 100 yards of the thickest hemp cord available, 3 large jars of pure, clean oil, and enough dried bread and cured meat to sustain 2 men for a journey of 3 weeks. Return to this very spot when the city's last night watchman sound his call." Judar, overwhelmed by the sight of the unexpected silver, rushed back to his compound. He quickly gave the bulk of the money to Fatima, easing her immediate fears and ensuring her comfort. He invented a plausible tale of a wealthy foreign caravan needing a personal, temporary tailor, a tale his mother, blinded by love and relief, readily accepted. He then swiftly purchased the necessary supplies, feeling a growing dread mixed with intense hope. The requests, the immense length of rope, and the specific quantity of oil spoke clearly of a mission far exceeding the usual trade of merchants. As the late hour arrived and the city settled into its deepest, darkest slumber, Judar returned to the harbor. Tawfiq was waiting, now leading 2 strong, silent mules laden with provisions, strange instruments hidden beneath heavy woolen blankets, and a few flasks of water. Without exchanging a single unnecessary word, the strange pair mounted the mules and left Cairo, riding away from the Nile's life-giving light and heading directly into the vast, silent expanse of the western desert. For the first week, they traveled only by night, resting during the harsh daylight hours. Tawfiq remained distant and silent, observing the stars and consulting ancient metallic compasses and intricate diagrams. He allowed Judar no questions, demanding only obedience and speed. Judar, though aching with curiosity, performed his duties flawlessly, driven by the memory of his mother's suffering and the immense promise of wealth. Finally, one cold morning, deep within a desolate rocky region where the land seemed to have forgotten the color green, Tawfiq stopped and dismounted. The time for silence was over. The crucial revelation was at hand. Judar, Tawfiq began, his voice taking on a formal, serious tone that resonated with ancient power. We are not seeking mere gold or silk. We are seeking the treasure of the Magi, a vast, unimaginable fortune hidden by the great sages of old within the mountains of Morocco. This treasure is not merely coins. It holds knowledge, artifacts, and power, sealed by the most complex, unbreakable spells known to man. Judar listened, his heart pounding in his chest. This confirmed his fears and hopes. He was dealing not with a merchant, but with a true, powerful master of the forbidden arts. Tawfiq then revealed the core difficulty of their quest. The treasure is guarded not by armies or beasts, but by a magical seal, a powerful, invisible barrier that can only be breached by a very specific ritual. This ritual requires a key, a human key, a man who is the sole remaining son of a long line of tailors, a man who is humble in spirit, and one whose heart has been purified by true poverty and suffering. The spell demands purity and humility for its success, qualities your greedy brothers lacked entirely. He looked sharply at Judar. You, Judar, fit this description perfectly. You will not face any physical danger from the guards or from me. Your task is simple. You must perform the specific actions I command, recite the sacred names I provide, and then you must be lowered into the final chamber. Your courage is merely required for the descent and the ascent. The wealth of the earth will soon be yours, provided you follow my every command to the letter and show no greed. The magnitude of the quest settled heavily upon Judar. He was not a porter. He was the unwitting magical key to a forgotten fortune. The honest tailor's son was now bound to a dark sorcerer's grand design. Their fate, once tied to the price of thread, was now tied to the power of ancient spells. The days and nights that followed the revelation of the quest were a monotonous blur of sand, rock, and relentless travel. Tawfiq proved himself to be a master not only of arcane knowledge, but also of navigating the boundless, cruel desert. He guided the mules with uncanny certainty, consulting the stars with intense concentration, and reading the subtle shifts in the wind and sand as if they were maps drawn in ink. Judar, though physically drained by the demanding pace and the arid environment, felt a strange sense of excitement mixed with dread. He was no longer carrying merchant's goods. He was carrying the responsibility of unlocking an ancient, forbidden secret. As they traveled west, they crossed several smaller oases and rocky plains, moving far beyond the familiar, established trade routes. Tawfiq grew even more silent, his face taut with the deep concentration required to maintain the subtle magical protections he had woven around their small group. He allowed Judar no unnecessary rest, constantly urging him forward, reminding him that every moment was valuable, and that their success relied entirely on reaching the site before the next full moon, a critical window for the ritual. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of barren landscape, they arrived at their destination. It was a desolate, silent valley, entirely ringed by black, volcanic mountains that rose sharply into the sky, their peaks shrouded in perpetual haze. The valley floor itself was covered in jagged, purple rock and seemed utterly lifeless. In the very center of this oppressive landscape stood a single, massive rock formation, a colossal stone that resembled a strange, silent monument carved by forgotten gods. Tawfiq immediately dismounted and raised his hands, uttering a quick series of names in a harsh, guttural language that made the hairs on Judar's arms stand on end. "We have reached the place of the sealed Judar," Tawfiq announced, his eyes blazing with feverish excitement. "This great stone marks the final resting place of the Magi's treasure. From this moment forth, absolute obedience is your only shield. One mistake, one thoughtless action fueled by fear or greed, and the magic will devour us both." Tawfiq worked with frantic energy. He unloaded the mules, ignoring the exhaustion of the journey. He took a heavy iron box from his provisions and pulled out a large mortar and pestle, grinding specific roots and strange mineral salts into a fine powder. He then began drawing a massive circle on the ground surrounding the great stone. This was no ordinary circle. It was a vast, intricate diagram composed of symbols Judar had never seen, serpents intertwined with stars, moons, and crosses, all drawn with a special, luminous chalk that seemed to absorb the twilight and glow with a soft, eerie blue light. The magician then carefully laid out the ropes, the oil lamps, and several scrolls written on dried skin. He spent the entire night preparing the ground, chanting in that harsh, secret language, performing gestures and throwing pinches of powder that shimmered in the weak moonlight. As dawn approached, casting long, unsettling shadows across the silent rock, Tawfiq finished his preparations. He turned to Judar, his expression deeply serious, his voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. "Listen closely, Judar, for these are the rules of the descent, and they cannot be broken," Tawfiq commanded, gesturing toward the ominous stone. "First, I will open the portal. I will lower you down using the rope and the harness I have prepared. You must enter the darkness without hesitation. Second, I will light a small lamp for you. This light is all you need to see your feet and the path. Third, you will find 4 small chambers in the descent, each marked by a distinct colored light: red, black, white, and blue. You must ignore these. You must not, under any circumstances, stop, look, or touch anything within these chambers." Tawfiq paused, his gaze burning into Judar's soul. "The final chamber, the 5th, will be sealed by a brass door. You must recite the name I give you now, Al-Sadiq, and the door will open. Inside, you will see the full, terrifying glory of the Magi's wealth. You will see more gold than 1,000 kings possess. But you are to ignore it all. Your task is simple. On a small black pedestal, you will find a small, simple box. It is no larger than a man's hand. You must take only that box and nothing else. If your eye lingers, if your finger touches a single coin, or if you stop to admire the treasure, the magic will seize you, and you will remain sealed within that earth forever. Do you understand, Judar? Take only the box, and the reward is yours." Judar, trembling slightly but fortified by his vow and his desire to save Fatima, nodded. The fear of the wealth was now greater than the fear of the dark. The time for the descent was at hand. The moment arrived as the sun reached its zenith, when the shadow of the great rock formation shrunk to its smallest point, marking the height of the magical power necessary for the ritual. Tawfiq finished his final complex preparations, drawing an unseen line in the dust with a long wand of carved bone. He ordered Judar to stand upon a specific, unadorned stone within the blue glowing circle. Tawfiq then began the primary invocation. His voice, once smooth and melodic, became loud, harsh, and strangely distorted, echoing unnaturally off the surrounding black mountains. The air grew thick and heavy, and a low, terrible rumbling began beneath Judar's feet. As Tawfiq chanted, The very ground near the immense central rock began to ripple, like water disturbed by an unseen force. The stone monument slowly, agonizingly, cracked open, not horizontally but vertically, revealing a terrifying, perfectly black abyss. The opening was a rectangular shaft, dropping into total darkness, and from it emanated a cold, earthy smell mixed with a faint, metallic scent of ancient, undisturbed wealth. "Hasten, Judar," Tawfiq commanded urgently, his breath coming in ragged gasps from the exertion of the spell. "The portal is unstable and will close swiftly. Strap the harness in the lamp." Judar, though paralyzed for a moment by the sheer horror of the sudden opening and the unknown depth of the pit, quickly regained his composure. He remembered his mother, Fatima, and the desperate poverty that drove him. He secured the thick hemp rope around his chest with a prepared leather harness. Tawfiq quickly lit a small, thick oil lamp. Its light was weak, but sufficient to ward off total blackness, and fastened it to Judar's belt. With a final desperate prayer to his father's spirit, Judar stepped over the edge. Tawfiq, now holding the rope with all his immense strength, began to lower the young man slowly into the shaft. The stone walls of the shaft were rough and cold, and the silence inside was broken only by the rasp of the rope and Judar's own rapid breathing. The descent was long and terrifying. After what felt like an eternity, Judar reached the first level, marked by a sudden change in atmosphere and a shocking, intense light. The first chamber, the Chamber of Crimson, a blood-red light spilled from an opening in the wall, revealing a vast cave entirely filled with masses of heavy crimson gold. Coins were heaped higher than a man, and jewels, rubies and garnets, lay scattered like worthless pebbles. The very air vibrated with the overwhelming allure of immediate wealth. Judar felt an instinctive urge to stop, to reach out, to grab just a handful. The sight of such easily attainable riches was almost a physical torment. But Tawfiq's warning, if your eye lingers, if your finger touches a single coin, the magic will seize you, echoed in his mind. He looked straight ahead, focusing only on the slow descent of the rope, and continued past the dazzling red glow. The rope continued to pay out, and he descended further into the earth, the red light fading above him. The second chamber, the Chamber of Obsidian. The light here was deep liquid black, emanating from piles of dark, shining onyx and immense, perfectly cut sapphires. The treasures were housed in polished, obsidian chests, guarded by silent, intimidating statues of black marble carved in the form of grotesque desert demons. The sight evoked a profound fear, a magical terror designed to make the heart stop. Again, the sorcerer's words were his guide. This chamber was clearly a test of courage and fear. Judar gripped the rope tighter, recited a prayer to himself, and hurried past the terrifying black figures, refusing to look directly at the treasures. He moved on, the shaft continuing ever downward, deeper than any well he had ever seen. The air became colder, drier, and began to smell faintly of strange, metallic dust. The trial was only halfway complete. The greatest tests of the soul still lay ahead. The descent continued, the immense length of the rope marking Judar's terrifying journey deeper into the heart of the earth. He passed swiftly beyond the terror of the obsidian chamber, his mind laser-focused on the promise of rescuing his mother, Fatima, from the grip of poverty. He knew that the trials were far from over. The magician Tawfiq had warned him of 4 chambers, and only 2 had been revealed. After a grueling passage through utter darkness, a soft, seductive light began to glow from the chamber below, signaling the third test of his spirit. The third chamber, the Chamber of Ivory and Pearls. This level was bathed in a gentle, warm white light, entirely different from the harsh glare of the gold or the cold dread of the black chamber. The chamber was not filled with raw wealth, but with overwhelming luxury and comfort. Magnificent couches and divans, upholstered in fine Damascus silk, were scattered across the floor. Ivory statues stood guard, and basins of polished silver held immense quantities of shining, perfect pearls and pristine white diamonds. The air here was heavy with the fragrance of sweet incense and rare spices. It was the temptation of peace, pleasure, and the soft life Judar had never known. For a moment, Judar felt his resolve waver, not from greed, but from the simple, profound desire for rest and security. He thought of his mother, exhausted and grieving, and wished he could offer her this instantaneous peace and luxury. The temptation was subtle, to stop the struggle, claim this serene, beautiful comfort. But he remembered Tawfik's strict command, do not stop, do not touch. He looked away from the silken couches and the gentle light, pressing himself against the cold stone of the shaft until the alluring fragrance was replaced by the metallic scent of the deep earth. The rope moved again, lowering him further. The silence was now absolute, broken only by the slight metallic scraping of the rope against the harness. The fourth chamber, the chamber of power and ambition. The final level before the vault was illuminated by a fierce, electric blue light. This chamber held no coins or comforts, but instead displayed the instruments of absolute power. Against the walls stood rows of shimmering, enchanted armor that seemed to pulse with captured energy. Tables were covered with ancient scrolls containing secrets of the stars and texts on summoning and commanding armies. Magnificent swords, blades of legendary sharpness and magical engraving, lay sheathed in jeweled scabbards. This was the temptation for revenge and dominion, the power to instantly crush his greedy brothers, Omar and Salim, and take back the honor of his father's name. This was arguably the strongest test of all. Judar's heart pounded with a fierce, almost irresistible urge to claim one of the magical weapons, to arm himself for the righteous war that lay ahead. The sword seemed to call his name, promising swift justice. But he recalled Tawfik's final, sharp warning. The wealth itself was secondary. The sorcerer only wanted the small, specific box. To take anything else meant failure and death. With a supreme act of will, Judar closed his eyes until the blue light was extinguished behind his eyelids, forcing his mind back to the small, simple task he had been given. Finally, the rope slackened, and Judar's feet landed on a flat, cold floor. He quickly unstrapped the harness and looked around. He was in a small, dark vestibule. Ahead of him stood an immense door forged entirely of blackened, heavily scarred brass, sealed tightly without hinges or visible locks. He approached the formidable entrance, his heart pounding, and remembered the key to the final chamber. He drew a deep breath, his voice cracking slightly from fear and exhaustion, and spoke the required name into the utter silence. Asterisk, asterisk, al-Siddiq. Asterisk, asterisk. The name resonated through the chamber, not as sound, but as an intense wave of magical energy. The brass door did not swing open. Instead, it began to dissolve, not into dust, but into pure light. The metal twisted, shimmered, and vanished completely, replaced by an opening that led into a chamber of overwhelming brilliance. The moment for mere temptation was over. The moment of ultimate, final obedience was at hand. The dissolving of the brass door was immediately followed by a breathtaking, overwhelming brilliance that forced Judar to shield his eyes. When he lowered his hand, he was gazing upon the accumulated wealth of centuries, the treasure of the Magi itself. This final vault was not merely filled. It was choked with unimaginable riches, making the 4 previous chambers seem like children's playthings. The walls were lined with heavy, solid gold bricks, stacked so high they disappeared into the darkness of the ceiling. Vast mounds of unrefined diamonds and massive emeralds lay scattered across the floor, reflecting the faint lamplight into a blinding rainbow of fortune. Chests made of pure silver, their surfaces encrusted with rubies, were overflowing with pearls the size of pigeon eggs. Ancient crowns, scepters, and artifacts of legendary kings, all made of precious metals and stone, lay carelessly tossed into corners. The sight was so grand, so completely overwhelming, that the very idea of poverty seemed to shatter into dust. For a moment, Judar forgot his vow. He took an involuntary step forward, his mind reeling. This was the solution. Not just for his mother, Fatima, but enough to buy the loyalty of armies and reclaim the honor of his entire line. He could take just one handful, just one small crown, and still leave behind a fortune beyond reckoning. The human instinct, the desperate urge to claim the wealth he had risked his life for, surged through his veins with irresistible force. He paused, trembling violently at the brink of disaster. He could hear the cold, resonant voice of Tawfiq echoing in his memory. If your finger touches a single coin, the magic will seize you, and you will remain sealed within that earth forever. The warning was his anchor. He realized the chamber itself was the final and most profound test of his character. The magic did not fear thieves. It feared greed. Judar, son of the honest tailor Syed, remembered his father's final counsel, that contentment was wealth. He forced his eyes away from the glittering mountains and began searching frantically for the single insignificant item he was tasked to retrieve. He moved slowly, carefully, walking on the very edge of the vast piled treasures, ensuring that his sandals did not scuff a single gold coin. His small oil lamp cast a weak circle of light, and finally, his gaze fell upon the far side of the massive chamber. There, resting upon a pedestal carved from matte, plain black obsidian, was the item Tawfiq desired. It was a small, simple box, made of polished wood and bound with strips of ancient copper, no larger than a man's two fists put together. It possessed no shine, no jewels, and no immediate monetary value. Yet the entire staggering fortune seemed to exist only to guard this single, unassuming vessel. With one final, desperate battle against the overwhelming voice of temptation in his mind, Judar focused all his will. He walked the remaining distance, his eyes fixed only on the small wooden box. He reached the pedestal and cautiously, with hands that shook not from fear, but from the intensity of the struggle, he touched the box. The instant his fingers closed around the polished wood, the entire chamber reacted. The blinding colors dulled, the overwhelming hum of the magical wealth momentarily silenced, and a deep, low groan resonated from the walls. The box was heavier than its size suggested, and felt warm and vibrant in his grasp. He had succeeded. His pure heart, his poverty, and his obedience had allowed him to bypass the magic that would have claimed any greedy man. He did not look back at the gold. He did not hesitate. Clutching the simple wooden box tightly to his chest, he spun around and retraced his perilous path, scrambling back toward the narrow entrance where the brass door had dissolved. Upon reaching the shaft, he secured the box inside his garment and grabbed the heavy hemp rope, pulling it 3 times with all his strength. This was the signal Tawfiq had required, the signal that the human key had performed his duty and was ready to ascend. Judar waited in the cold darkness, relieved that the terrifying trial was over, unaware that the most dangerous part of his adventure, the betrayal of the sorcerer, was just about to begin high above him. He hoped that Tawfiq, true to his word, would now grant him the freedom and the fortune he had risked his life to earn. The silence of the deep earth was finally broken by the taut scraping of the hemp rope as Tawfiq began to haul Judar upwards. The ascent was agonizingly slow, far more difficult than the descent had been. Judar, clutching the small wooden box tightly within his shirt, felt his muscles strain against the pull, a physical representation of the massive power Tawfiq was exerting from above to overcome the weight of the rope and the man. As he was dragged upward, he passed the 4 infamous chambers in reverse order, their lights flashing briefly, blue, white, black, and red, a final, shimmering farewell to the riches he had so resolutely refused. The sight of the wealth now brought him only relief. He had passed the final test. He looked forward to the daylight, to the promise of freedom, and to the wealth that Tawfiq had sworn would be his. However, as he neared the top of the shaft, Tawfiq's voice descended, no longer calm or resonant, but sharp, demanding, and utterly devoid of patience. "Hasten, Taylor's son. Why do you slow the process? The spell is weakening. Hold fast, and do not damage the treasure." Tawfiq snarled, his words betraying the avarice that had been hidden beneath his patient exterior. Judar realized with a sudden cold shock that Tawfiq had never cared for his welfare. He only cared that the box of the Magi arrive intact. The sorcerer's true nature, hidden during the weeks of travel, was now fully exposed in the anxious urgency of his final success. Finally, after a desperate final heave, Judar's head broke the surface. He gasped, blinded by the return to the sunlight and the fresh, dry air of the valley. He was immediately pulled clear of the jagged opening, landing roughly on the rock near the massive stone. Before Judar could even sit up, Tawfiq was upon him, his eyes wide and fierce, completely consumed by an almost insane singular focus on the treasure. He reached out to check if Judar was harmed, but instantly tore open the front of the young man's garment, snatching the small wooden box. "Fool, you have wasted too much time," Tawfiq hissed, his face contorted in a sneer of pure contempt. He examined the box quickly, his fingers brushing over the copper bindings, ensuring the seal was unbroken. A moment of intense, relieved triumph flashed across his face. Judar, still dazed and struggling to catch his breath, managed to stammer out the question he had risked his life to earn. "Tawfiq, the fortune you promised. The reward for my obedience and courage." The sorcerer laughed, a short, dry, hateful sound that echoed cruelly across the silent valley. He tucked the box of the Magi securely into his own voluminous robes. "Reward, boy. Your reward is that I did not leave you to die of thirst in the desert, as I should have done. Did you truly believe a great master of the arts would share the ultimate secret of the Magi with a simple tailor's son? You were the key, Judar, nothing more. Your purity opened the door for my destiny. The wealth you saw belongs to me alone." With his final brutal statement of betrayal, Tawfiq moved with terrifying speed. He did not waste time cutting the thick rope, which still lay near Judar's hand. Instead, he raised his carved bone wand and uttered a sharp, loud counter-incantation. The earth trembled violently again, and the massive stone opening that led down to the treasure instantly began to close. The two edges of the monumental rock crashed together with a deafening, earth-shaking thunder. A great plume of dust and pulverized rock shot into the air, instantly sealing the abyss forever, trapping the boundless wealth and the dangerous knowledge from any future interference. The quest was complete, and the evidence of the magic was now buried deep. Tawfiq did not even spare a final glance for Judar. He mounted one of the mules, securing the reins of the second mule, and rode away at a reckless gallop, disappearing swiftly into the desolation of the Moroccan hills, leaving Judar alone, stranded, and betrayed in the desolate, sun-baked valley. Judar was left lying on the hard, jagged ground. He was battered and bruised from the rough ascent, his throat dry with dust, his heart reeling from the sudden, vicious betrayal. The only thing remaining from his grand adventure was the single purse of silver coins Tawfiq had initially given him to buy provisions, coins he had wisely kept for his mother. Once again, he was poor, far from home, and facing the impossible task of surviving the desert and returning to Cairo. The sorcerer had won the treasure, but Judar had survived the ultimate test of character and learned a terrible, profound lesson about the true, dangerous nature of human greed. Lying stunned in the dust of the Moroccan valley for a long time, the young man's body barely registered the heat. The shock of the betrayal by Tawfiq was almost as painful as the physical exhaustion. The roar of the mountain sealing the treasure vault echoed in Judar's mind, symbolizing the definitive end of his brief, treacherous journey into magic. He had stared down mountains of gold, only to be left with less than nothing by a man whose greed was far more immense than any treasure. Slowly, painfully, Judar pushed himself upright. He realized that lamenting the sorcerer's deceit was useless. His immediate enemy was not Tawfiq, who was now far away, but the vast, silent, unforgiving desert. He was alone thousands of miles from Cairo, with no map, no reliable direction, and barely enough silver coins to sustain him for more than a few days of desperate travel. He thought instantly of his mother, Fatima, believing him safely employed, and the urgency to survive became his only focus. He located the meager water skins and the remaining dried bread from the supplies Tawfiq had carelessly abandoned when he rode off. With a profound sense of determination, Judar began his long walk eastward, relying on the knowledge of the stars he had learned during his travels with his father and the brief, secretive journey with the sorcerer. He committed to walking only during the early morning and late evening, conserving his energy against the savage, unrelenting midday sun. The next few days were a brutal trial of endurance. The lack of liquid wealth now translated directly into physical agony. He passed small, isolated encampments of nomadic tribes, and here, his simple purse of silver became his lifeline. He used the coins sparingly, bartering for small amounts of foul, brackish water, and dry barley cakes. The nomads were wary and often hostile, respecting only the harsh law of survival, but Judar's polite persistence and humble demeanor convinced them to spare him the necessary supplies. Yet, despite his tenacity, the desert was winning. By the end of the fourth day, Judar's strength was entirely spent. His lips cracked and bled, his legs cramped with pain, and the horizon ahead seemed to swim in the heat haze, offering no sign of familiar civilization. He collapsed near a low rock outcropping, his small reserves of water gone, and despair finally threatened to overwhelm his pure heart. He closed his eyes, accepting that he might die here, far from home, just when his life had promised to change. As he lay there, weak and defeated, a sudden sound disturbed the silence. The slow, deliberate tread of sandals on stone. He managed to open his eyes and saw a figure approaching. This was not a fierce nomad or a traveling merchant, but a solitary old man dressed in the simplest, purest white robes. The man carried nothing but a carved wooden staff and a small leather pouch. His face was serene, his beard long and white, and his eyes held a depth of compassion that immediately distinguished him from the greedy eyes of the world. The old man knelt beside the broken young tailor, placed a cool hand on Judar's fevered brow, and spoke in a gentle, calming voice. "Fear not, my son. Your struggles have brought you to the brink, but your journey is not over. I have seen your path, and I know of the betrayal of the man of black knowledge. Your simple goodness is a light that the darkness could not extinguish, and that is why fate has guided my steps to you now." The holy man offered Judar a drink from a small flask, water that tasted sweeter and cleaner than any Judar had ever known, and a few dates that instantly restored strength to his weakened limbs. He provided rest and shade for a full day, speaking to Judar not of trade or riches, but of patience, resilience, and the divine rewards of justice. Your true treasure, Judar, is not gold, the old man counseled. It is your unwavering spirit. The trials of poverty and the betrayal of Tawfiq were necessary to cleanse your soul, making you ready for a greater destiny. When you reach Cairo, your struggle will not end, but you must continue to act with honesty. Your brothers, Omar and Salim, though they profited briefly, will soon face a far harsher truth. Your return home is the start of a long journey, not the end of an adventure. Go with courage and trust that goodness will find its due reward. With a holy man's guidance and the small sustenance he provided, Judar felt his hope rekindled. He knew he was still facing an almost impossible walk, but he was no longer walking alone. He was walking with a counsel of wisdom. He bid farewell to his mysterious benefactor, armed with a renewed purpose and a deep spiritual resolve, and continued his long, agonizing trek back towards the familiar comfort of the Nile and the unknown fate that awaited him in Cairo. The solitary figure continued his walk across the desolate, arid landscape, his footsteps slow but determined. The counsel of the mysterious old man had acted like a balm on his wounded spirit, replacing despair with quiet resolve. Judar knew the miles ahead were immense and unforgiving, but he focused only on the immediate path, surviving on the scraps of dried food and the few sips of water he managed to purchase with his dwindling silver. He kept his head down and his heart fixed on the single most important goal, returning to Cairo and the loving embrace of his mother, Fatima. His journey was a testament to simple human endurance. He followed faint, ancient trails, guided only by the position of the sun during the day and the familiar patterns of the stars at night. Days bled into weeks. He often encountered harsh weather, sandstorms that choked the air, and nights that plummeted into chilling cold. But he pushed through, fueled by a purpose far stronger than the fleeting greed of his brothers. After weeks of continuous, desperate effort, a great change came upon the land. The dry, cracked earth slowly gave way to rolling hills of sparse grass, and the bitter, salty desert wind was replaced by the humid air of the sea. Judar realized he had successfully navigated the long sweep of the North African coast and was finally nearing a known port city, likely Tripoli or a smaller town along the route back to Alexandria. His heart swelled with hope. He quickly exchanged the last of his silver coins for better food and a worn, modest set of clothes, shedding the dust-caked rags of his desert ordeal. He found humble work in the small port for several days, loading and unloading fishing vessels, using his familiar strength as a porter to earn passage on a merchant ship heading east toward Egypt. The sea journey itself was slow, fraught with rough weather and long days of anticipation, but every mile covered brought him closer to home. Finally, one clear morning, the familiar, beloved silhouette of Cairo's minarets appeared on the horizon. The vast journey was over. Judar stepped onto the bustling docks of the Nile, his body thinner and hardened, his eyes carrying the deep wisdom of the desert, yet his spirit as pure as when he had left. He quickly made his way through the winding, noisy streets towards his old neighborhood, the air thick with the scents of spices and trade. When he reached the small home above the closed tailor shop, the reunion with Fatima was intensely emotional. The poor woman, having endured weeks of worry and loneliness, wept with overwhelming joy and relief, barely believing her son had returned alive. She held him tightly, murmuring prayers of thanks, noting his deep exhaustion and the hard lines etched onto his young face. Judar, not wanting to worry her with the terrifying truth, simply told her that the foreign caravan job had been unexpectedly difficult and had been cut short due to political troubles in the distant lands. He presented her with a small amount of coin he had earned during his passage, enough to sustain them for a few more weeks. He returned instantly to his life as a common porter. He reopened the tailor shop's shutters, not to work, but to maintain the illusion for his mother. Yet he spent his days laboring at the docks, lifting heavy burdens to earn their daily bread. His father's warning about greed remained foremost in his mind, and he sought only honest, hard-won provision. Meanwhile, the narrative of his greedy older brothers, Omar and Salim, took a radically different turn. They had reached the distant city of Baghdad, a hub of wealth and endless opportunity, and had immediately begun to live lives of vulgar, reckless excess. They converted their inherited wealth, the gold and the silk money, into jewels, fine horses, and lavish entertainment. They frequented the most expensive taverns, bought the loyalty of local thieves and hangers-on, and boasted loudly of their supposed mercantile genius. They made no sensible investments, bought no stable properties, and paid no mind to the inevitable depletion of their funds. They had fled the dignity of their father's honest life, and now, fueled by sudden, ill-gotten wealth, they were racing rapidly toward a dramatic, inescapable financial ruin, entirely convinced that their superficial prosperity was permanent. The desert had hardened Judar's spirit, but the city had softened his brothers' minds, making them ripe for destruction. While Judar worked tirelessly beneath the hot Egyptian sun, enduring the hard labor of a porter to sustain his mother, Fatima, his two elder brothers were experiencing the sharp, cruel consequences of their unrestrained greed in the bustling, wealthy city of Baghdad. Omar and Salim, mistaking sudden, unearned money for true wisdom, had lived like kings for a brief, glorious period. They reveled in expensive taverns, bought the finest garments, and attracted a large retinue of false friends, hollow men and flatterers who stayed only as long as the wine flowed freely and the money jingled loudly. Their inherited wealth, which their father Syed had carefully accumulated over decades, was recklessly thrown away in a matter of months. Omar, convinced he was a brilliant speculator, made disastrous investments in risky ventures that promised quick returns but delivered nothing but crippling losses. Salim, obsessed with status, wasted huge sums on useless, flashy jewelry and throwing lavish, endless parties for his newfound friends. The steady, rapid hemorrhage of their gold was ignored, as both were entirely convinced that their superficial prosperity was permanent and somehow destined. Then the inevitable occurred. The day came when the purse was empty and the bills could no longer be paid. The two brothers found themselves sitting alone in their rented, luxurious lodgings, staring at the bottom of their empty chests. The silence was instantly shattered by a fierce, bitter argument. Omar blamed Salim for the excessive entertainment. Salim blamed Omar for the foolish investments. Their unity, born only of shared avarice, collapsed immediately under the pressure of poverty. The response from their supposed circle of friends was swift and brutal. When Omar tried to borrow a small sum from the merchant who had praised his genius, the man merely laughed and turned his back. When Salim visited his former companions, seeking advice or assistance, they suddenly claimed to be terribly busy or conveniently absent. The truth was harsh and undeniable. The brothers had bought company, not loyalty, and the moment the gold ran dry, they were discarded like worthless wrecks. Humiliation followed swiftly. They were forced to sell the extravagant jewelry they had purchased, receiving only a fraction of its original worth. Then with the fine horses, followed by their luxurious garments, exchanged for meager coin. Finally, they were evicted from their lodging, forced to sleep in the squalid back alleys of Baghdad, suffering the bitter cold of the night and the shame of daytime begging. Omar, once so proud and arrogant, found himself reduced to competing with the lowest porters for work, his hands, softened by years of idleness, quickly blistering and bleeding from the unfamiliar labor. Salim, incapable of such exertion, wandered the markets, his stomach cramping with hunger, forced to beg for scraps from the very vendors he had once ignored. They were the subjects of ridicule, pointed at by the wealthy merchants who had once envied their sudden, temporary fortune. It was during this period of absolute misery that the true weight of their betrayal of Judar and Fatima finally settled upon them. They remembered their youngest brother's patience and his father's final warning about the desert of greed. They realized that Judar, whom they had scorned and cheated, was the only one who had acted with true honor and foresight. "We have failed entirely, brother," Omar confessed one evening, his voice rough with defeat. "We chose the coin over the craft, and the coin abandoned us. We are ruined, and Baghdad will spit us out. Our only hope lies in Cairo," Salim replied, desperation hardening his voice. "We must return. Judar is kind. He will not allow his mother to see us starve. We shall humble ourselves, beg their forgiveness, and exploit the very weakness, his goodness, that we once mocked." The decision was made. Penniless and clad in rags, their bodies bearing the marks of hunger and hardship, the two disgraced brothers began the long, agonizing journey back to Egypt, relying on the grudging charity of travelers and the sheer chance of survival. They were returning not as the triumphant pashas they had promised, but as broken men, prepared to prey upon the good nature of the only family they had left. Meanwhile, back in Cairo, Judar continued his honest work, his small earnings providing a consistent, if meager, comfort for Fatima. He had achieved stability through sheer devotion and humility, unaware that the darkest storm was not the desert he had survived, but the return of the very blood that sought to drain his peace. He was prepared for hardship, but he was utterly unprepared for the renewed test of familial forgiveness that was rapidly approaching his doorstep. The long, arduous journey from Baghdad to Cairo was a testament to the fact that even the greediest of men will fight for survival. Omar and Salim, humbled only by absolute starvation, finally stumbled back into the familiar, dusty thoroughfares of the Egyptian capital. They were no longer the proud, boastful men who had departed months ago. Their faces were gone, their fine clothes reduced to filthy rags, and their eyes held the hollow, desperate look of true destitution. They made their way directly to the tailor's shop. When they reached the familiar alley, they paused, shame and calculation warring within them. The scent of their childhood home stirred faint memories of better times, quickly overshadowed by the memory of their last selfish act. It was Fatima, Judar's mother, who first saw them. She was sitting in a small kitchen above the shop when a shadow fell across the doorway. She looked up and saw the two ragged figures, and for a long moment she could not speak. The initial shock gave way not to maternal love, but to a profound, cold sorrow. She instantly recognized their wretched state as the inevitable result of their own corruption. Judar arrived moments later, returning from a heavy day of labor at the docks, his shoulders aching from the weight of the burdens he had carried. He stopped dead in the doorway. The sight of his elder brothers, the men who had cheated him, abandoned him, and left his mother to starve, now standing before him in abject misery, was a staggering blow. Omar and Salim immediately collapsed into a dramatic display of remorse. They threw themselves at Judar's feet, kissing his hands and sobbing loudly, their performances honed by weeks of begging on the streets of Baghdad. "Brother Judar, noble one," Omar cried, tears streaming down his face. "We beg your forgiveness. We were fools, blinded by the deceit of the city and the false promises of wealth. We wasted everything our good father left us. We have been punished 100-fold, and we have nowhere to turn but to the sanctuary of your kind heart." Salim added his plea, his voice weak with genuine exhaustion. "We are starving, Judar. We are ruined. We understand now the profound mistake we made when we abandoned you and our mother. "Do not abandon us now, or we shall surely perish in the street." Fatima watched the scene with profound skepticism. Her eyes were sharp with maternal mistrust. She had seen through their greed once, and their current suffering did nothing to erase her memory of their cruelty. "They left us to ruin Judar," she warned, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "They are vipers who return only when they are empty. Do not let them bring the rot back into our honest home." But Judar's heart, refined by the trials of the desert and the counsel of the holy man, was incapable of vengeance or sustained bitterness. He saw only the terrible suffering of his own blood. He remembered his father's final warning, "Do not let avarice divide what blood has bound." He was unwilling to compound their crime against him with a crime against humanity. "Rise, my brothers," Judar said softly, stepping forward and helping them to their feet with great effort. "I forgive you. You are my family, and this is your home. What is mine is yours. Your troubles are ended. You will never know hunger again under this roof." He immediately set aside his own exhaustion and began preparing a hot meal for them, the best he could afford from his meager porter earnings. He provided them with clean water, fresh clothing, and gave them the only spare bedding he possessed. For the next few weeks, the brothers rested and recovered under Judar's selfless care. But as their strength returned, their false remorse began to fade, replaced once again by the cold, festering tumor of their original greed. They began to resent Judar's continuing virtue and the fact that their salvation relied entirely on the humility and poverty of the brother they had cheated. They loathed the sight of him leaving every morning to work the humiliating labor of a porter while they slept in comfort. They could not bear his consistent goodness, which served as a constant mirror to their own deep corruption. They began whispering again in dark corners of the house, no longer plotting how to get rich, but how to eliminate the source of their endless shame. The stage was set for the final, most wicked betrayal. As the weeks passed in the small house above the silent tailoring shop, Omar and Salim regained their physical strength entirely, but their souls only sank deeper into corruption. The shame of being dependent on Judar, the brother they had scorned and cheated, was a constant, unbearable torment. His tireless work ethic and quiet humility were like a searing brand upon their guilt. They could not stand the silent, virtuous superiority of their younger brother, and the fact that Fatima watched them both with open, cold suspicion only fueled their simmering malice. The brothers soon stopped whispering about forgiveness and began to plot with renewed, calculated cruelty. They realized their path to wealth was permanently blocked as long as Judar remained the ethical pillar of the family. They needed to dispose of him, not by killing him outright, as even their darkened hearts shrank from that horror, but by removing him permanently from Cairo, allowing them to seize the remaining assets. One evening, Omar initiated the new phase of their conspiracy. He approached Judar with a masterful display of feigned humility and earnest ambition. "Brother Judar," Omar began, his voice lowered to a tone of grave sincerity. "We have recovered, thanks entirely to your boundless kindness, which is a treasure greater than any gold we pursued. We have decided that living off your meager earnings as a porter is a disgrace we can no longer bear. We must redeem ourselves and prove we are worthy of your forgiveness." Salim, practiced in deception, quickly supported the plan. "We have analyzed the trade routes, Judar. We still possess the knowledge of commerce. There is a profitable venture in selling specific types of rare dyes, purchased cheaply in Alexandria and sold at immense profit in the smaller towns along the Syrian border. This requires a journey, a long one, but the profit could restart our family's fortune, allowing us to reopen the tailoring shop properly." The plan was a pure fabrication, designed to exploit Judar's two most profound qualities: his unwavering honesty, and his desire to see his brothers reformed. They needed his honesty to ensure he would undertake the journey without question, and his departure would leave them free to act. They explained that such a journey required the trustworthiness and physical fortitude that only Judar possessed. "We, your elder brothers, will stay here," Omar concluded, cementing the lie. "We will diligently watch over our mother, Fatima, and we will manage the meager funds until you return with the profits. This is our chance to prove our redemption, Judar, and share the burden of supporting our mother." Judar listened, his kind heart swelling with hope. He genuinely believed that his brothers were finally turning a corner, seeking to follow their father's honest path. The idea that his hardship might have finally reformed them was a reward greater than any treasure. However, Fatima, who had overheard the entire exchange from the kitchen, burst into the room, her eyes flashing with terror and deep conviction. "Do not listen to them, my son," she cried, clutching Judar's arm with desperate strength. "They are lying. Their words are poison honey. They abandoned us once, and they will abandon us again the moment you leave. I saw the darkness in their eyes when they arrived, and it has not left. Stay here, Judar. Do not trust men who traded the safety of their home for the promise of a distant dream." She pleaded with him, using every argument and every memory of their past suffering, recognizing instinctively that this was the final, critical test of his life. But Judar, torn between his deep respect for his mother's wisdom and his profound commitment to forgiveness, made the fatal mistake of choosing hope. He could not, in conscience, deny his brothers the chance to redeem their honor and prove themselves worthy of their father's name. "Mother, I understand your fear," Judar said gently, though his decision was firm. "But if I refuse them this chance, I condemn them forever to their shame and their wickedness. They must be allowed to try to become honest men. I will undertake this journey. I will buy the goods in Alexandria and travel to the border towns. I trust them to care for you in my absence. My faith is in their potential for goodness." Despite Fatima's tearful protests, the brothers had successfully manipulated Judar's purest intention into the perfect trap. They provided him with a small, calculated amount of capital, just enough to start the false trade, and secured his departure. Omar and Salim watched him leave Cairo early the next morning, their faces solemn in public, but their eyes gleaming with cold, triumphant relief. The tailor's shop and their mother were now entirely at their mercy, and their next inevitable act of betrayal would be far crueler than the first. Judar, full of hope and convinced of his brother's commitment to redemption, traveled with speed and diligence toward Alexandria. He successfully purchased the specific rare dyes and the bolts of high-quality cloth Omar and Salim had instructed him to acquire. From Alexandria, he began the long, dusty journey inland, heading east toward the remote border towns near Syria, fully intent on maximizing the profits that would restore their family's honor and comfort his mother, Fatima. He traveled alone, relying on his strength and the advice of caravan leaders, his mind already calculating the modest profits he might share with his brothers upon his triumphant return. Back in Cairo, the moment the brothers confirmed that Judar was well beyond the point of returning swiftly, the mask of false piety fell away completely. Their true, savage intentions were immediately unleashed. Fatima, profoundly unsettled by the sudden departure of her trusting son, was in the small kitchen when Omar entered, his face cold and hard. He did not speak a word of comfort or explanation. Instead, he quickly and violently threw the heavy wooden bolt across the main door of the small home, locking her inside. "What are you doing, Omar?" Fatima cried, terrified by the sudden malice in his eyes. Omar and Salim ignored her pleas entirely. They worked with cold, and human efficiency. They immediately went downstairs and opened a tailor shop, quickly selling the few remaining precious tools their father, Syed, had left behind. They found a buyer for the entire small building, the shop and the home above it, accepting a quick, low price in exchange for an immediate cash settlement. They liquidated everything, taking every last coin that remained in the house, including the small jar of dried beans and the remaining few loaves of stale bread. Their plan was an act of final, utter wickedness. They would take the money, abandon Cairo, and leave their mother, Fatima, locked inside the property, intending for her to die of thirst and starvation before the new owner could take possession. They believed that by eliminating the one person who knew their truth, they could forever escape the shame of their past and the consequence of their actions. Let Judar's kindness be the death of you both. Omar sneered as he prepared to leave the locked house. We owe nothing to the poverty you embraced. Enjoy your silence, mother. They sealed the lower shop door and fled Cairo without a backward glance, disappearing into the eastern roads, their pockets now jangling with the final blood money gains of their familial destruction. Fatima's ordeal began immediately. Trapped within the confines of the small, airless home, she hammered desperately on the doors and the single small window. She screamed Judar's name until her voice broke, but the house was located in a narrow, less trafficked alley, and the noise of the bustling city quickly swallowed her desperate cries. Hours turned into a terrifying, foodless night. Thirst soon became a crushing torment. She understood her fate. Her own sons, the children she had nursed and raised, were willing to let her die alone for the sake of a few miserable coins. The entire next day passed in agony. Fatima's strength failed. Her voice was reduced to a raspy whisper, and her body, weakened by weeks of worry and poor nutrition, began to suffer from the lack of water. Just as she surrendered to despair, hearing the heavy footsteps of the new owner approaching to inspect his property, fate intervened in the form of a caring neighbor. A woman named Aziza, who lived across the alley, had noticed the unusual stillness of the house and the absence of Judar's usual cheerful greetings. Sensing something was terribly wrong, Aziza cautiously approached the house. She heard a faint, desperate whimpering sound from the upstairs window and immediately recognized Fatima's voice. Alarmed, the neighbor quickly gathered a few strong men from the market. They broke down the main wooden door just moments before Fatima collapsed from thirst and exhaustion. She was pulled out, barely conscious, her throat dry and her strength utterly gone. The neighbors quickly realized the unspeakable crime that had been committed, shocked that anyone, let alone sons, could perform such an act of monstrous, calculated cruelty. Fatima was rescued, but she was entirely destitute and heartbroken. The house was sold, the shop was gone, and her two eldest sons had vanished like smoke. All that remained was the agonizing wait for Judar's inevitable, painful return. Driven by the pure intention of helping his brothers achieve redemption, Judar worked tirelessly on the long trade route they had assigned him. He traveled to the remote border towns, negotiated with diligence, and successfully sold the dyes and cloth purchased in Alexandria. His integrity and honesty served him well. He secured the expected profit and even a little more, completing the complex transaction with great skill. His heart was light, filled with a deep satisfaction that transcended mere monetary gain. He had not only secured a profit for his family, but, far more importantly, he believed he had helped Omar and Salim embark on the path of honor. With his mission accomplished, Judar started the long, eager journey back to Cairo. He endured the heat and the dusty roads with renewed enthusiasm, already rehearsing the moment he would present the profits to his brothers and his mother, Fatima. He imagined his family reunited, finally living under the banner of honest work, their father Syed's final wishes finally fulfilled. As he finally approached the familiar district in Cairo, his pace quickened. The smell of the street vendors, the noise of the market, it was all comfortingly home. However, as he turned the corner into the small, narrow alleyway where his family's shop stood, a chilling premonition stopped him cold. The old tailor shop was closed, its shutters heavily barred, but not with the familiar wood Judar had left behind. More unsettling still, the small home above the shop was occupied by strange faces. A man Judar did not know was leaning out of the window, and an unfamiliar woman was hanging laundry from the balcony. The building had been painted a different, garish color, utterly unlike the quiet, familiar tone he remembered. Judar's heart plummeted. He rushed forward, his voice tight with alarm, and demanded to know what had happened to the tailor's house and the family who lived there. He did not need to ask twice. The sound of his frantic voice drew the attention of the kind neighbor, Aziza, the woman who had saved Fatima's life. She recognized Judar instantly, her face twisting with sorrow and anger. She grabbed his arm, pulling him into her own small doorway, desperate to spare him the humiliation of a public scene. "Judar, dear child, praise be to God that you have returned safely," Aziza whispered urgently, her eyes brimming with tears. "You must prepare yourself, for your wicked, treacherous brothers have committed a crime so monstrous that the earth itself should reject them." With a heavy heart, Aziza recounted the entire harrowing story. She described the chilling speed of Omar and Salim's actions, how they waited until he was gone, how they locked Fatima inside the home without food or water, intending for her to perish, and how they sold the shop and the very roof over her head for a paltry sum before disappearing like shadows. Judar listened, utterly paralyzed. The profit purse he held, the physical proof of his honest labor and his unwavering faith in his brother's redemption, fell from his numb fingers to the dusty ground, scattering a few gold coins that held no meaning whatsoever. The betrayal of Tawfiq had been sharp and immediate, a magical trap. But this calculated cruelty by his own flesh and blood was a wound that pierced his soul to its very core. The memory of his mother's desperate warning, which he had foolishly ignored, now echoed as a painful, terrible truth. "Where is she, Aziza? Where is my mother?" Judar managed to ask, his voice rough with despair. Aziza gently led him inside her small, humble dwelling. There, lying upon a borrowed mattress, was Fatima. She was physically weak, but the deeper injury was to her spirit. She was broken, her eyes dull with the profound pain of having been willfully abandoned by her own children. The reunion was silent. Fatima looked at her youngest son, and though she saw his genuine love, she also saw the immense sacrifice he had made for her. She was too weak to weep, too weary to voice her rage. Judar knelt beside her, clutching her frail hand, the successful trade forgotten, the wealth he had once pursued reduced to meaningless dust. He was penniless again, the shop gone, and burdened with the ultimate, terrible duty of protecting his mother from the very people who shared his blood. He had nothing left but his courage and the deep, silent wisdom gained from the desert and the holy man's counsel. He knew now that his path must diverge entirely from the path of men guided by earthly greed. The shock of the final, despicable betrayal settled upon Judar not as a crushing weight, but as a cold, hard clarity. His faith in the potential goodness of Omar and Salim was utterly destroyed. Their wickedness was now an undeniable force. He secured his mother, Fatima, who remained fragile and silent with heartbreak, ensuring she received basic sustenance and rest under the gentle care of the kind neighbor, Aziza. Judar knew he could not impose indefinitely upon Aziza's generosity. Using the small profit he had earned from the single successful trade run, the only clean money remaining, He rented a tiny single room in the poorest, most crowded section of Cairo. It was a miserable dwelling, dark and airless, but it was private and provided a basic roof over his mother's head. He worked to make it as comfortable as possible for Fatima, who seemed to derive her only comfort from her son's presence. With his mother's immediate safety secured, Judar returned to the docks. He resumed his back-breaking labor as a porter, hauling and lifting heavy burdens, but his spirit was no longer focused merely on survival. The gentle, naive patience of the past had hardened into a steely, quiet resolve. He now worked not just to earn bread, but to find a path to power, a power sufficient to protect his mother and achieve true, meaningful justice against the wicked forces that plague his life, be they his brothers or the dark magic of the sorcerer. As he toiled, his mind turned incessantly to the terrifying knowledge he acquired during his brief time with Tawfiq. He recalled every detail of the magical quest, the symbols Tawfiq had drawn, the sequence of the chambers, and the precise, complex incantation Tawfiq had used to open and seal the vault. He remembered the old, pious man he met in the desert, who had spoken of his pure heart being the key to a greater destiny. Judar began to realize the extent of his hidden strength. Tawfiq had used him not just for his strength, but for his spiritual purity asterisk, a magical ingredient that Tawfiq himself lacked. Judar had been physically cheated of the box of the Magi, but he possessed a greater, intangible treasure, the knowledge of how to access the magical world, combined with the unique virtue required to use it safely. One evening, exhausted from his work, Judar sat beside his sleeping mother. He took out a piece of charcoal and a scrap of paper he had salvaged and began to draw, reconstructing the symbols and the massive magical circle Tawfiq had etched into the desert ground. He reviewed every moment of the ordeal. He remembered Tawfiq telling him, "The treasure is guarded by a magical seal, powerful, invisible barrier that can only be breached by a specific ritual. A man who is the sole remaining son of a long line of tailors, a man who is humble in spirit." He had fulfilled that purpose perfectly, but he also remembered the 4 chambers he had resisted. He realized that the treasure was not just the small box Tawfiq stole. The gold, the jewels, the weapons, everything was still sealed there. The immense wealth was still available. He had simply lacked the authority and the means to claim it without Tawfiq's help, a mistake he would not repeat. Judar understood that to stop his brothers and secure his future, he needed more than money. He needed a protective power that could not be stolen or corrupted by human greed. He came to the bold, terrifying conclusion that he must return to the place of the seal, this time on his own terms. He began the slow, meticulous planning for his second private quest. He knew he could not simply walk back. He needed resources, protection, and a genuine, non-magical purpose to travel to Morocco without arousing suspicion. He calculated the exact amount of savings he needed to hire a guide and purchase a few months of provisions. The porter's wages were agonizingly slow, but Judar had a new focus, a secret goal that burned brighter than the desert sun. He was no longer the victim of betrayal. He was preparing himself to become the master of his own destiny, using the secret knowledge of the sorcerer against the very forces that had sought to destroy him. The months that followed were a period of grinding, relentless labor for Judar. Every ounce of his strength was dedicated to his single, secret purpose. He worked as a porter from the moment the dawn broke until the lamps were lit in the evening, refusing all distractions and pleasures. Saving money was a profound psychological torment. Every coin he set aside for the quest was a coin withheld from comforting his heartbroken mother, Fatima. Yet he knew that this temporary sacrifice was the only road to a permanent solution and the justice they desperately needed. In the solitude of their small, rented room, while Fatima slept, Judar practiced. He carefully etched the intricate, complex symbols of the sorcerer Tawfiq onto scraps of leather and parchment, memorizing the geometric sequence of the Great Circle, the specific placement of the altar stone, and the precise guttural language of the final incantation. He recalled the details of the four chambers with cold clarity, preparing himself mentally to resist the temptations he knew lay ahead. He was no longer a naive youth. He was a purposeful man, armed with forbidden knowledge and a soul refined by suffering. After nearly a year of this grueling discipline, Judar had managed to accumulate a small but substantial sum, enough to pay a trusted guide and purchase high-quality provisions for the long, dangerous journey to the western desert. His preparations for Fatima's safety were meticulous. He sought out the kind neighbor, Aziza, and humbly confessed his necessity to leave for another long, distant trading journey. He paid Aziza several months of rent in advance, plus a significant sum to cover his mother's food and care, promising her a handsome reward upon his return. Aziza, recognizing the maturity and fierce resolve in Judar's eyes, promised to watch over Fatima as if she were her own. He did not tell his mother the true, terrifying nature of his quest, merely assuring her that this time he was prepared for all eventualities and would not return until their future was secure. Fatima, weakened but reliant on her son, accepted his promise with quiet resignation, her trust in him now absolute. Finding a guide was a challenge. Judar sought a man who was knowledgeable of the deep western routes, discreet, and most importantly, unconcerned with the strange, desolate nature of the destination. He found his man in an old, grizzled Bedouin named Hassan, known for his silent reliability and his willingness to travel for high pay, asking few questions. Judar purchased the mules and provisions, ensuring he secretly packed specialized items Tawfiq had used, a fine mortar and pestle, bags of specific mineral salts he recognized from his time with the sorcerer, and the largest, thickest length of hemp rope he could find. He concealed these items carefully beneath blankets and ordinary trade goods, ensuring Hassan remained entirely unaware of the magical nature of the expedition. One cold, starlit night without fanfare, Judar left Cairo for the second time. He rode beside Hassan, heading west toward the setting sun and the heart of the desert. The contrast between this journey and his first was stark. On his first trip, he had been a victim, riding behind the dominating figure of Tawfiq, driven by blind faith and desperation. Now he was the master of the expedition, driven by cold calculation and purpose, riding toward the magical vault not to be used, but to take. He reviewed the map of his memory daily, rehearsing the final moment of the ritual, focusing on the single, terrifying truth. He was venturing into the magical world entirely alone, relying only on stolen knowledge and the purity of his own soul to protect him from the unleashed powers of the treasure of the Magi. The fate of the tailor's son was no longer tied to the honest stitching of cloth, but to the perilous, intricate working of an ancient, terrible spell. The westward journey was long and physically brutal, a tireless march across the vast, rolling expanse of the Sahara. Unlike the first trip, where Judar had been a bewildered follower of the sorcerer Tawfiq, this time he was the determined leader. He managed the provisions, consulted the stars, and maintained a stern, unyielding focus that left no room for doubt or fear. He was no longer thinking of his brother's redemption, but of his mother, Fatima, and the absolute necessity of obtaining the power that would end their suffering forever. His guide Hassan, the grizzled Bedouin, proved to be exactly what Judar needed: silent, effective, and fiercely loyal to the generous contract they had established. Hassan, however, grew increasingly perplexed as they traveled deeper into the desolate, unfamiliar regions of the Moroccan desert. They moved far from all known trade routes, heading toward mountains that promised no water, no commerce, and no gold vein a sane man would pursue. One evening, by the weak light of their campfire, Hassan finally voiced his confusion. "Master Judar," the guide asked respectfully, "we have journeyed for many long weeks. The destination you seek is known only to the spirits and the jackals. There is no water, no trade, and no civilization for 100 miles beyond where we are headed. What manner of goods do you seek to purchase in such a forsaken place?" Judar, who had anticipated this moment, maintained his quiet composure. He had fabricated a simple, believable cover story. "Hassan, my journey is not for common trade. I seek a specific, rare mineral that is used in the ancient dyes of Cairo, found only in the deepest, most desolate rock formations. It is a slow, difficult work, and it requires absolute privacy and silence. I am a man seeking to restore my family's name, and this stone is the key." Hassan, satisfied by the generous wages he had already received and trusting in Judar's honest demeanor, accepted the explanation without further question. He had seen stranger obsessions in the men who ventured into the boundless desert. The journey culminated weeks later, precisely as Judar's memory had dictated. They entered the silent, oppressive valley ringed by black, volcanic mountains. In the center stood the colossal, ominous rock formation, the Stone of the Seal, just as he remembered it. The sight sent a cold shiver down Judar's spine, stirring the deep memory of the Earth's violent reaction to Tawfiq's spell and the humiliation of the subsequent betrayal. Judar dismounted immediately, his purpose now absolute. He handed Hassan a large, generous purse of gold coins, far more than their contract required. "Hassan," Judar commanded, his voice firm and final, "your task is complete. The place I must work is not fit for two men. I require solitude that cannot be disturbed. I want you to ride back east to the small, known oasis of the Singing Water. Wait there for me. You are to rest the mules, buy new provisions, and remain there patiently for precisely 30 days. If I do not return by the 30th day, then you may keep the mules and the remaining provisions, and you must return to Cairo, informing Aziza, the kind woman who looks after my mother, that I did not return from the desert." Hassan protested slightly at the immense distance and the danger of being left alone, but the sight of the gold and the absolute conviction in Judar's eyes were persuasive. He knew no ordinary merchant would pay such a price for isolation. "As you command, Master Judar," Hassan replied, bowing his head. "I will wait at the Singing Water until the moon is full once more. May God protect you from the spirits of this dead land." Within the hour, Hassan rode away, his figure quickly swallowed by the distant, rocky plains. Judar was left utterly, profoundly alone. He stood at the foot of the immense, silent stone, the quiet oppressive, the air thick with an unseen, powerful magic. He was facing the very earth that had nearly claimed his life, armed only with a precise, stolen blueprint of sorcery and the innate purity that had been his only shield. He pulled the mules into a protected crevice, unloaded the rope and the hidden magical tools, and looked up at the Stone of the Seal. The sun was beginning its slow descent, leaving him only a few hours of light to prepare the ancient site. There was no time for contemplation or fear. Every detail had to be perfect. If the ritual failed, the seal would not just repel him, it would consume him entirely, leaving him trapped forever alongside the gold he had once refused. Judar quickly began drawing the massive, complex magical circle, meticulously tracing Tawfiq's symbols into the dry earth with the luminous chalk he had prepared. The destiny of the tailor's family now hinged entirely on the successful execution of forbidden, powerful magic. The twilight faded swiftly in the deep valley, plunging Judar into a cold, terrifying darkness broken only by the light of the stars and the eerie, persistent glow of the luminous chalk lines he had meticulously drawn. The massive magical circle, a complex web of ancient symbols and geometric intersections, now entirely encircled the stone of the seal. Judar placed the specific mineral salts at the cardinal points, lit the oil lamps he had brought, and set the censers smoking with potent, burning herbs he had carefully sourced. Every detail was executed with the chilling precision he had stolen from his memory of Tophia's ritual. He stood in the center of the circle, the heavy scent of the smoke filling the cold night air. The gravity of the task settled upon him. There was no sorcerer here to correct his mistakes, only the unforgiving, unleashed power of the ancient magic. His clothes were damp with sweat, but his hand was steady as he raised a small, plain wooden staff he had carved for the purpose, positioning himself directly before the silent, colossal stone. Drawing a deep breath, Judar began the incantation. The words were harsh and alien, straining his tongue and throat, the guttural, resonant language of power that Tophic had used to command the earth. Unlike the sorcerer, Judar lacked magical training, but his voice was fueled by a purer, more focused desperation, the singular need to save his mother and exact justice upon the wickedness of Omar and Salim. As he chanted the sacred names, the air around the circle grew instantly heavy, crackling with an unseen energy. The luminous lines of the chalk began to pulse brightly, casting his shadow in strange, distorted shapes across the rock face. The cold earth beneath his feet began to tremble, not with a natural geological shift, but with a terrifying, responsive tremor. The sound of the wind was abruptly silenced, replaced by a low, powerful groan emanating from the very core of the mountain. Judar continued the spell, pushing through the physical pain of the immense magical exertion. He could feel the power building, attempting to repel him, but his unwavering will and the sincerity of his cause, free from the sorcerer's greed, acted as a flawless shield. He completed the final commanding phrase, pointing the staff directly at the stone of the seal. With a deafening, thunderous crack, the massive rock responded. The stone split violently, and immediately, the two halves pulling apart to reveal the familiar, perfectly black rectangular shaft plunging into the depths. A rush of cold, earthy air, carrying the faint, metallic scent of centuries-old treasure, rushed up from the abyss. The magical seal had been successfully breached. There was no time for relief. The opening was unstable and would close rapidly. Judar quickly secured the heavy hemp rope to a nearby anchor point he had prepared, strapped the harness around his chest, and tied the small, reliable oil lamp to his belt. He looked down into the blackness, his heart pounding a steady, rhythmic drumbeat against the silence. This time, there was no Tophic holding the rope, shouting commands. This descent was entirely his own. He lowered himself carefully over the jagged edge, the rope burning against his heavily gloved hands as he began the controlled fall into the unknown. The descent was quicker this time, driven by his efficiency and singular focus. Soon, the glow of the first chamber, the Chamber of Crimson, appeared below him. The mass of gold and rubies pulsed with its overwhelming, tempting light, calling out with the siren song of effortless wealth. But Judar had already mastered this temptation. He glanced only briefly at the glittering mountains of crimson wealth, using the light to guide his feet. He did not hesitate, did not allow his eyes to linger, pushing his body to descend past the dazzling opening. He was not here for the gold. He was here for the power that lay deeper, the source of which Tophic had so selfishly concealed, and he knew he could not stop until he reached the final true target. His quest for justice was now moving into the terrifying realm of the magical unknown. The long descent into the black throat of the earth continued, a lonely, perilous journey guided only by the rope in his hands and the faint, shimmering light of the chambers he passed. Judar, now stripped of his youthful naivety, maintained a rhythmic, steady control, using his immense physical strength not for mere labor, but for survival against the ancient forces arrayed against him. His mind was focused, a hard diamond of resolve, rejecting every whispered lure of the sealed chambers. He soon reached the level of the second chamber, the chamber of obsidian. The light here was a deep, menacing black, and the air turned instantly cold, carrying the oppressive, suffocating weight of magical dread. Grotesque statues of demonic figures, carved from polished black marble, seemed to watch him with hateful, silent malice. Immense, cut sapphires, dark and shining, lay piled in threatening mounds. This chamber was designed to test courage and fear, overwhelming the visitor with a raw, paralyzing terror. For a brief, sharp moment, the primal fear gripped Judar, and he remembered the terrifying speed with which Tawfiq had rushed him past this point during the first journey. But now he had the time to choose. He consciously fought the urge to close his eyes. He looked straight at the most terrifying of the obsidian figures, recognizing it for what it was, a manufactured illusion of power. His resolve, bore the bitter cruelty of his brothers, was a stronger force than this ancient fear. My fate is not determined by stones or shadows, he thought, but by the justice I seek for my mother. He pressed his body tightly against the cold wall and continued his controlled slide downward, the terrifying chamber passing above him like a bad dream. The rope continued to pay out, and the descent seemed endless. Finally, the light changed again, softening the oppressive darkness with a seductive, gentle glow. He entered the third chamber, the chamber of ivory and pearls. The soft, luminous white light illuminated piles of glowing pearls and pure white diamonds resting on beds of silk. The air was thick with the scent of expensive incense, promising ease, comfort, and the immediate cessation of all struggle. This was the test of peace and surrender, the temptation to abandon the path of hardship and simply claim a life of luxury. Judar thought of Fatima and how much he longed to give her this comfort. He could stop now, take the pearls, and return to Cairo a wealthy man, forgetting the deep injustice done to him. Yet he knew that money alone would not protect them from the relentless malice of his brothers. True security lay in the power Tawfiq had sought. He rejected the soft, silken lure of the chamber, his focus unyielding. The final chamber approached, marked by an intense, electric blue light. This was the fourth chamber, the chamber of power and ambition, laden with shimmering, enchanted weapons, armor that seemed to pulse with captured energy, and scrolls promising forbidden knowledge and dominion. This was the ultimate temptation for a man who had been cheated and betrayed, the power to achieve vengeance. Judar stopped for a moment, letting the desire for swift, complete retribution against Omar and Salim wash over him. He could take a single sword, return, and enforce his will with irresistible force. But the words of the holy man returned to him. Your true treasure is your unwavering spirit. He realized that taking these instruments of war was to succumb to the very greed that had ruined his brothers. He was here not to become a sorcerer or a king, but to claim the means to establish an honest, unassailable life. He decisively ignored the weapons, forcing himself past the ultimate test of ambition. Finally, the rope slackened, and he landed softly in the familiar small, dark vestibule. He unstrapped the harness, his body trembling with exhaustion and the residual energy of the magic he had just mastered. Before him stood the immense, menacing, but now slightly scarred brass door. He approached it, his voice clear and steady, filled with the confidence of one who has faced his deepest fears and temptations. Asterisk El Sadiq, asterisk. The magic responded instantly and violently. The door did not just dissolve. It burst into a brilliant, temporary flash of blinding light, transforming the massive metal into vapor and revealing the final vault. Judar stepped through. The vault of unimaginable wealth, the stacks of gold, the mounds of jewels, still lay before him in their full, terrifying glory. But his eyes were not on the coins. Tawfiq had only taken the small box, signifying that the true object of power was not the gold itself. Judar scanned the chamber, using his knowledge and memory to find what the sorcerer must have used to control the magic, not just to access it. He saw the obsidian pedestal where the small box had rested, but now he noticed something beneath it, an inconspicuous, almost concealed niche in the floor. Following his instinct, Judar knelt down, ignoring the dazzling wealth surrounding his head, and reached into the dark crevice. His fingers brushed against something cold, ancient, and round. He pulled it out. It was a dull, simple brass lamp, tarnished and unremarkable, clearly hidden beneath the pedestal and left behind by Tawfiq in his greedy haste to seize the wooden box. This, Judar instantly knew, was a true instrument of power. Clutching the dull, ancient brass lamp, the true instrument of power hidden beneath the pedestal, Judar did not allow himself a moment of triumph. He knew that the magical seal he had broken was volatile, and that the stone above would soon crash shut. Ignoring the blinding sheen of the gold that surrounded him, he rushed back toward the shaft, his mind entirely focused on escape. He secured the lamp tightly within his garment, grabbed the thick hemp rope, and began the agonizing ascent. Pulling his own weight up the immense vertical shaft was a trial of raw muscle and sheer willpower. He scrambled past the chambers, the blue, the white, the black, and the crimson, in a blur of exhausted determination, driven by the urgency of the closing spell. His arms ached, his lungs burned, and the single frail oil lamp dangling from his belt swung wildly, casting dizzying shadows. As he neared the top, he could hear the ominous groan of the colossal stone beginning to shift. The air at the surface grew heavy, and sparks of magical energy flashed along the edges of the shaft. With a final desperate burst of strength, Judar pulled himself over the jagged lip of the opening, collapsing onto the rough ground beside the colossal stone. He barely had time to roll clear before the great stone halves of the seal of the Magi slammed shut. The impact was deafening, a cataclysmic roar of stone grinding against stone that shook the entire valley. A massive cloud of dust and pulverized rock erupted, instantly obliterating any trace of the ritual circle he had painstakingly drawn. The vault was sealed once more, but this time, the true key was safely in Judar's possession. Exhausted but alive, Judar allowed himself a few moments to recover his breath, tasting the dust and the metallic scent of magic in the dry air. He knew that Tawfiq had initiated a quick counterspell, the first time to ensure the sealing. Utilizing the sorcerer's stolen knowledge one last time, Judar muttered the quick, final incantation, the words to secure the seal and protect the knowledge he had just risked his life for. He felt a satisfying surge of power, confirming that the earth was locked and the remaining treasure was safely hidden until the time of his choosing. Finally secure and utterly alone, the tailor's son drew the tarnished brass lamp from his garment. It was heavier than it looked, and its metal was dull, covered in centuries of grit. It felt intensely cold to the touch, yet Judar sensed a profound, humming power sleeping within it. He sat down and began to wipe the dust and grime from the lamp's surface with the edge of his tunic, intending only to examine his prize. The moment his finger rubbed the metal vigorously, the reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. The lamp suddenly shuddered violently in his hand, and a thick plume of dense black smoke, smelling faintly of sulfur and ozone, erupted from the lamp spout. The smoke did not dissipate into the air. Instead, it coiled and gathered until it coalesced into a colossal, breathtaking form. Standing before Judar, towering high above the surrounding rocks and dwarfing the mountains themselves, was a genie, a djinn of unbelievable power and majesty. His skin shimmered with a golden blue light, his eyes burned like embers, and his body was wreathed in shimmering, incandescent energy. The very air vibrated with the presence of this ancient, overwhelming force. Judar, who had faced down mountains of gold and terrifying statues, was momentarily frozen, gazing up at the magnificent figure with. The genie bowed low, his voice a sound like distant thunder, yet respectful and clear. "I hear you, master. I am the servant of the lamp. I am the bound slave to the one who holds this simple vessel, the djinn of the ring and the treasure of the ages. I am commanded by the seal of Solomon, and I have slept for 1,000 years. Now tell me, master, what is your command? Who are you, that you possess the purity to penetrate the seal and claim this instrument of absolute power?" Judar, slowly finding his voice and composure, realized the immense, terrifying truth. The wooden box Tawfiq had stolen was merely a container for a lesser magic. The lamp was the master key, the direct source of infinite power. His purity and suffering had led him not to a thief's prize, but to the dominion over a true, colossal magical being. "I am Judar, the son of Syed the tailor," Judar replied, his voice gaining strength as he grasped the reality of his situation. "And I seek justice for the betrayal done to me and my mother." The genie smiled, a vast, frightening, yet ultimately compliant expression. "Then ask, Master Judar. I am bound to serve your desires. Your every wish is my command. But be warned, my service is absolute, and my power is beyond your comprehension. Choose wisely, for the fate of your house, and perhaps the fate of the entire world, now rests upon your words." Judar paused. He thought not of gold, not of armies, and not of revenge against his wicked brothers, Omar and Salim. He thought only of the frail, heartbroken woman he had left behind in Cairo. "First, genie," Judar commanded, holding the lamp steady in his hand, "I must test your power and my heart's true purpose. My first wish is this. I command you to transport my mother, Fatima, instantly and safely from her humble lodging in Cairo to this valley, placing her gently and peacefully beside me now. Do this, and I shall truly believe your power." The thunderous voice of the genie echoed across the desolate valley, the very air vibrating in compliance with Judar's first command. The colossal figure of the jinn did not hesitate or question. He merely raised one massive, glowing hand. Instantly, the sky above them fractured with a blinding, noiseless flash of emerald light, followed by a rush of wind so fierce it pressed Judar flat against the ground. The event was instantaneous, transcending the physical laws of time and space. When the light and the furious wind subsided, and the air settled back into silence, Fatima was standing confusedly beside her son. She was still clad in the simple worn clothes she wore in Cairo, but her eyes, though wide with bewilderment, were entirely unharmed. She was perfectly safe unharmed, and now standing thousands of miles from her rented room. Her initial fear was not of the desolate location, but of the monumental being that towered over her son. She cried out, her voice thin with terror. "Judar, my son, what calamity is this? What demon stands before us?" Judar scrambled to his feet, quickly pulling his mother into his arms, shielding her from the jinn's terrifying magnificence. "Fear nothing, mother. It is a blessing, not a calamity. This is the answer to our prayers, a servant who obeys only the virtuous. Look at me, mother. We are safe, and we are together. He then turned back to the colossal genie. "Your power is true, mighty Jinn," Judar stated, his voice now firm with the absolute authority of a master. "But your presence is too vast for the sight of my mother. I command you now, disguise yourself and wait patiently. You shall remain unseen, available only to my summons, until I rub the lamp once more." The genie bowed again, his form dissolving into a benign plume of shimmering gold smoke that swiftly entered and disappeared within the lamp. The atmosphere returned to normal, leaving only Judar, Fatima, and the silent, desolate landscape. Judar spent a precious few minutes calming his mother, explaining only that God had rewarded his honesty with a wondrous, obedient spirit who could grant their wishes. He did not risk revealing the details of Tawfiq or the vault. Finally, Judar addressed the lamp again. He was not guided by greed, but by the memory of the poverty and instability that had allowed his brothers to attack them. He held the lamp and spoke his second, life-changing command. "Great Jinn," Judar commanded, his voice ringing with the clarity of a man who knows exactly what he needs. "My second wish is for a home that is safe, magnificent, and unassailable. I command you to construct, instantly, the most beautiful palace in a secluded, fertile oasis near the great city of Cairo, a palace that is fully furnished with every comfort and luxury known to man, attended by a staff of loyal servants. I further command that this palace be filled with a stable, respectable, self-sustaining fortune, not piles of raw gold, but valuable properties, investments, and honest sources of revenue. Finally, I command you to transport my mother and me instantly and safely to the central chamber of this palace, with all our meager possessions from Cairo beside us." The moment Judar finished his command, the lamp grew intensely hot in his hand. The ground beneath them did not tremble. It seemed to vanish entirely. There was another silent, overwhelming flash of light that engulfed the entire valley. When Judar and Fatima could see again, they were standing not in the dusty, desolate Moroccan valley, but in a vast, echoing chamber of breathtaking beauty. They were surrounded by cool marble floors, soaring cedarwood ceilings carved with intricate patterns, and walls hung with the richest silks and tapestries. Judar led his mother to a luxurious divan. Fatima, overwhelmed by the change, wept tears of pure, astonished joy. They were in a palace of unparalleled splendor, set in a massive, lush garden visible through immense arched windows. Outside, they could hear the gentle rush of water and the chirping of exotic birds. The humble tailor's son was now the master of a miraculous fortune, a self-made sovereign whose palace was the envy of kings. He had suffered through betrayal and deprivation, but his purity had been the ultimate enduring key. Judar looked at his mother, now resting comfortably and peacefully for the first time in years. He realized that this glorious earned fortune, built on virtue and not on avarice, stood in stark and eternal contrast to the reckless, fleeting gains of his wicked brothers, Omar and Salim, who were currently destitute and humiliated, wandering somewhere between Baghdad and Cairo. The true judgment was only now beginning. The transition from a dusty, rented room in a crowded alley to the palatial serenity of the new mansion was, for Fatima, a miraculous recovery. She was overwhelmed by the sheer, stable luxury. The palace was not merely opulent, it was a sanctuary. Its gardens were vast and fragrant, its rooms cool and spacious, and the staff, placed there by the genie's magic, were loyal, quiet, and attentive. For the first time since the death of Syed, Fatima's face lost the etched lines of sorrow and fear, replaced by the tranquil dignity of a woman finally secure. Judar watched her recovery, finding a satisfaction far greater than any pile of gold. Judar quickly settled into his new role. He recognized that to protect their fortune and his mother, he could not simply remain the porter who had vanished. He adopted the identity of a wealthy, reserved merchant who had spent years trading in the distant West and had chosen Cairo as his final grand resting place. He instructed his staff to refer to him simply as al-Gharib, the stranger. The brass lamp remained his most guarded secret, hidden within his chambers, and he used the genie's power only for necessary administrative tasks and maintaining the hidden loyalty of his household. He never wished for more gold. The fortune provided by his second wish was already vast and self-sustaining, derived from magical investments in profitable ventures. The sudden appearance of the magnificent palace, set just outside the recognized perimeter of Cairo, was an event that caused an immediate, explosive sensation. The grand structure seemed to have risen overnight from the arid ground, its white marble glistening under the Egyptian sun, its high walls surrounding gardens that bloomed impossibly bright. Servants were seen coming and going, all highly paid and discreet, but the sheer speed of the palace's construction defied all local knowledge and logic. Within days, the rumors had spread through the marketplaces and the courts of Cairo like wildfire. Tales were exchanged of a mysterious, immensely wealthy young man, sometimes described as a noble from the western Maghreb, sometimes as a prince from distant lands who had settled in their city. His wealth was rumored to be inexhaustible, his jewels unparalleled, and his manners impeccable yet deeply reserved. The Sultan himself received reports of the extraordinary new edifice, ordering discreet inquiries into the identity of the powerful newcomer. It was into this atmosphere of wonder and gossip that Omar and Salim finally returned. They arrived in Cairo, ragged, starving, and ashamed, many weeks after their arrival should have happened. Their long, miserable journey had taken its toll. They were now reduced to the worst kind of begging. Their first desperate act was to stagger toward the small alley where their family home stood. The shock was immediate and paralyzing. The tailor's house was gone. In its place stood a strange, newly painted building occupied by entirely new tenants who knew nothing of the Sayed family. Their last, desperate refuge was denied them. They demanded to know where their mother was, where the shop had gone, and who had dared sell their property. The new tenants merely sneered at the sight of the two filthy beggars. Desperate, they sought out the neighbor, Aziza. Aziza, remembering the monstrous cruelty they had inflicted upon Fatima, received them with searing contempt. She confirmed the full, terrible truth. Their mother had almost died because of their wickedness. The shop was sold, and their mother was now gone to live in safety, sheltered by a powerful, kind benefactor. Aziza did not mention Judar, only saying that their mother was safe where they could never find her, and she cursed them, forbidding them ever to darken her door again. Omar and Salim were left paralyzed by a mix of fear, confusion, and despair. They were entirely ruined. As they slumped dejectedly near the city gate, wondering where they might find a corner to sleep, they overheard two spice merchants arguing vehemently. In the white marble walls, one merchant insisted, counting his wares. They say the palace is a miracle, built in a night by the wealth of this new prince from the west. I tell you, a man who builds a palace so swiftly must have the aid of a jinn or possess the wealth of 20 sultans. Omar and Salim stopped, their ears snapping to attention. A new, impossible palace? A mysterious, rich stranger? A profound, sharp pang of their inherent greed pierced their shame. They spent the next few days listening to every whisper, every wild exaggeration about the wealth of al-Gharib. They slowly grew convinced that this new sudden fortune must somehow be related to the magical quest Judar had embarked upon years ago, perhaps believing that Tawfiq had somehow failed, or that Judar had stumbled into an immense new fortune on his own. They began to calculate not how to beg for forgiveness, but how to access this new, magnificent wealth. The seeds of their final, most dangerous scheme were already being sown in their rotten hearts. For several agonizing days, Omar and Salim haunted the fringes of the bustling marketplace, listening intently to the endless flow of rumors surrounding the miraculous new palace and its mysterious owner, al-Kassif. They pieced together the fragments of gossip. The owner was young, arrived suddenly from the west, and possessed wealth that defied measure. Their suspicion crystallized into a certainty that this fortune was directly linked to the magical quest they had abandoned, or perhaps to the secret Tawfiq had sought. Their shame quickly evaporated, replaced by a consuming fire of avarice. "It must be that idiot Judar," Omar hissed one night, his voice thick with a mixture of rage and envy, as they sheltered near the city wall. "He must have stumbled upon some treasure Tawfiq missed, or perhaps the sorcerer failed. He always possessed that baffling, stupid luck. It matters not how he found it," Salim replied, his eyes gleaming with cold calculation. "He is simple. He is kind. He will not deny us his own blood if we approach him correctly. We must humble ourselves fully, claim kinship, and then find the means to seize the source of this wealth." They spent their few remaining coins and begged scraps to clean themselves, buying new tattered, but deliberately humble clothes to enhance the appearance of wronged, long-suffering poverty. They rehearsed their roles meticulously. They were to present themselves as victims of the harsh world, separated from their beloved, virtuous younger brother by cruel fate. They fabricated a story of being robbed and abandoned, casting themselves as the unfortunate victims of the outside world. Finally, clad in their expertly arranged rags, the two brothers approached the colossal gates of the palace. The sheer scale and architectural splendor of the entrance, crafted from flawless white marble and flanked by uniformed, imposing guards, momentarily intimidated them. Omar, gathering his failing nerve, stepped forward and addressed the head guard with a voice practiced in false humility. "Good sir," Omar began, bowing low, "we beg an audience with a noble master, al-Kassif. We are but humble, unfortunate men who have traveled far. We believe the master of this house is our long-lost, deeply beloved youngest brother, Judar, whom we have been searching for across the wide world." The guards, accustomed to the strange requests attracted by the palace's fame, were skeptical but followed protocol. The request was relayed instantly to the master. In the palace's inner sanctum, Judar received the message with a calm that belied the turmoil of his mind. He was sitting with Fatima, who, though recovered, remained cautious and nervous about the world outside. He had known this moment was inevitable. He knew the depths of their wickedness, yet he also knew that their reappearance was his final, greatest test. This was not a test of courage, but of wisdom and the administration of justice. "Do you know these men, my son?" Fatima asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I know them well, mother," Judar replied, a faint, almost pitying smile touching his lips. "They are the serpents I chose to believe were angels. Do not fear, mother. Their power over us is finished. Their return is a necessary step toward the justice we deserve." He instructed his chief steward to bring the two men into the great reception hall, emphasizing that they were to be treated with respect, but carefully monitored. He then went to the hall, seating himself upon a high, simple, but richly adorned seat, adopting the reserved, powerful demeanor of the mysterious prince from the west. When Omar and Salim were led into the hall, they were genuinely stunned. The hall was magnificent beyond their most avaricious fantasies. Columns of onyx, floors inlaid with mosaics of gold and lapis, and scents of rare incense filling the air. The contrast between this immense, unearned splendor and their own pathetic, ragged state was a brutal slap of irony. They saw the figure seated on the dais, a handsome, richly dressed young man, refined and powerful, his eyes carrying an unnerving depth of knowledge. They immediately recognized the face of Judar, but saw him transformed utterly by wealth and authority. Omar and Salim immediately executed their performance. They rushed forward, falling to their knees, weeping and dramatically kissing Judar's feet. Brother Judar, Omar sobbed, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. We have found you. We were ruined by wicked thieves. They took everything. We searched for you for months, enduring every hardship, only hoping to see your face one last time before starvation claimed us. We begged our way back to Cairo, only to find our mother and our home gone. Salim added his false plea, looking up with feigned innocence. We know nothing of this magnificent place, noble brother. We only know we were cheated, and we pray your kind heart will offer us shelter, for we have no one else in the world. Judar watched their performance in silence, his expression unreadable. Their lies were transparent, their manufactured tears crude. He saw no remorse, only avarice and renewed deceit. He let them grovel for a long moment before finally speaking, his voice smooth and commanding. Rise, strangers, Judar commanded, using the formal address of a noble. I recognize the hardship in your faces. If you truly are the brothers of the humble man who lived in the city, then I shall grant you shelter. You will be provided with comfortable lodgings within the palace walls and given fresh clothing and sustenance. But know this, in this palace my word is law. Any attempt at deception or disloyalty will be met with immediate, profound consequence. You may stay, but your conduct will determine your fate. He did not confess his true identity, choosing instead to let them wallow in the confusion and fear of their great mistake. The brothers, blinded by the promise of immediate comfort and access to the wealth, thanked their noble benefactor profusely, their plotting minds already racing with schemes to discover the secret of the palace, the hidden lamp, and seize the fortune for themselves. Their ultimate betrayal was about to begin, but this time they were facing a master they did not recognize. Omar and Salim settled into the luxurious comfort of the palace, outwardly playing the role of humbled, grateful beneficiaries. They were given splendid chambers, rich clothing, and endless food, a deliberate, soft confinement orchestrated by Judar. Their bellies were full, their bodies rested, but their hearts were tormented by the glittering, frustrating mystery of the wealth that surrounded them. Every silk curtain, every polished piece of marble, was a mocking symbol of the fortune that lay just out of their grasp. They spent their days in meticulous, clandestine surveillance. They watched Judar, whom they secretly called the Idiot Prince, noting his calm routine. They observed that he never conducted vast commercial transactions, never received major caravans, and never seemed anxious about the depletion of funds. This confirmed their suspicion. The wealth was not earned. It was sustained by a hidden, magical source. They interrogated the palace staff with probing, manipulative questions, trying to locate a secret vault, a locked chamber, or an unusual artifact. But the staff, bound by the genie's magic to loyalty and discretion, gave only vague, polite answers, frustrating the brothers immensely. The palace, built by instantaneous magical command, held no earthly secrets, no hidden passages, and no tangible evidence of its creation. This palace is impossible. Omar fumed one evening in the privacy of their chambers, pacing the marble floor like a caged beast. It is too new, too perfect. The wealth does not move. He must keep the source, the key on his person or in his room. We need to know what Tawfiq failed to mention. There is only one person who knows his history, his habits, and the precise timing of his strange departure to the west. Salim replied, his voice dangerously low. And that is the old woman. We must approach Mother. The next morning, they staged their most elaborate performance of filial devotion. They sought out Fatima, who was now housed in a serene, sunlit suite, attended by a maid. She looked utterly transformed, her face radiating a quiet strength they had never seen before. They fell to their knees, weeping and dramatically beating their chests. "Mother," Omar cried, his voice thick with practiced sorrow. "We have failed you. We have searched for you everywhere. We have endured misery beyond measure because of our foolish greed. Now that God has restored you to safety under the care of this noble stranger, we beg you to forgive our past sins. Tell us, Mother, how did this miracle happen? How did you find this prince?" Fatima looked down at her two elder sons. She saw their splendid robes, the look of health restored to their faces, but she saw absolutely no trace of genuine remorse in their calculating, hungry eyes. The memory of being locked in the dark room, left to die of thirst, was a spiritual scar that no amount of false tears could erase. Her past suffering had finally granted her true, invincible wisdom. "Rise, my sons," Fatima commanded, her voice calm and firm, imbued with the dignity of her security. "You speak of forgiveness, but your eyes speak only of greed. You are here because this kind man offered you shelter, not because you sought my comfort. Your brother, the porter you scorned, would never have treated me as you did. I know nothing of this palace, or of how my benefactor found his fortune. I only know that I am safe, and that my master is a man of profound goodness, unlike the men who left me to perish in the darkness." Her rejection was absolute, cold, and utterly unexpected. She did not raise her voice in anger. She simply extinguished their lies with the quiet, final truth of her experience. She refused to give them any opening, any detail, or any hint about the brass lamp or Judar's identity. Frustrated and enraged by this failure, the brothers retreated. They realized that their mother was protected by a wall of resolute silence and dignity. Their desperation intensified. All avenues of subtle espionage were closed. They were prisoners in a golden cage with the key, the source of the magic, in the pocket of the man they believed was merely a naive, kind benefactor. "We have wasted too much time," Salim finally concluded, his face pale with rage. "The mother is lost to us. We must discard the pretense. He is a simple tailor's son, regardless of his palace. Tonight, Omar, we enter his private chambers. We find the source of his power and take it by any means necessary." The plot was finalized, an act of physical violence and theft. They resolved to search Judar's private chambers while he slept, believing that the magical key must be there. They had forgotten every lesson and every warning, their wickedness now guiding them toward the final, inescapable trap Judar had quietly set for them. Judar knew the moment Omar and Salim entered the palace that their presence guaranteed a final, vicious confrontation. He observed their failed attempts to manipulate Fatima and their furtive, greedy glances at his chamber doors. This night, he concluded, would be the end of their wickedness and the administration of the justice he had earned through suffering. He was calm, devoid of hatred, treating the impending attack not as a peril, but as a necessary final chore. He instructed his magically loyal staff to remain passive, allowing the brothers to execute their plot unhindered. He spent the evening in silent contemplation, placing the brass lamp securely beneath his pillow and ensuring his chamber was dimly lit. He waited, fully awake, resting against the silken cushions, his mind sharp and prepared. The attack came in the deep hours of the night, when the palace was blanketed in silence. Omar and Salim, having successfully bypassed the outer guards, who were under silent orders to let them pass, crept through the vast hallways. They moved like shadows, fueled by desperation and a malignant excitement. They carried short, heavy bludgeons they had secretly acquired from the kitchens, tools intended not just for theft, but for the silent incapacitation of their victim. They successfully forced the simple lock on Judar's chamber door and slipped inside, their eyes immediately scanning the opulent room for any sign of a hidden safe, a treasure chest, or the elusive magical source. "Quickly, fool," Omar whispered urgently, pushing Salim toward the immense, carved cabinets. "It must be here. Look for a scroll, a box, anything." They ransacked the visible areas of the room for several frantic, futile minutes. The source of the wealth was nowhere to be found. Frustrated and sweating, they finally turned their attention to the sleeping area where the young benefactor lay. "There," Salim whispered, pointing to the bulge beneath the pillow. "He keeps his secret close. Take it." They lunged simultaneously toward the bed, their bludgeons raised. "Stop, my brothers," a calm, clear voice commanded. Omar and Salim froze, their weapons hovering in the air. Judar had risen silently, sitting upright on the edge of the bed. His face, illuminated by the low lamplight, was no longer the soft, naive face of the porter, but the stern, unwavering face of a judge. "You seek the source of my fortune, my dearest Omar and Salim?" Judar asked, his voice entirely devoid of anger, which was more terrifying than rage. "It is here." The two brothers stared, bewildered. They finally recognized the depth of the deception. The noble al-Gharib was indeed the brother they had betrayed. They dropped their bludgeons, their murderous intent crumbling into shock and paralyzing fear. Judar reached beneath his pillow and drew out the tarnished brass lamp. He held it up for them to see, his eyes meeting their horrified gaze. "You searched for a wooden box, didn't you?" Judar said, his voice laced with a cold memory of his suffering. "The sorcerer Tawfiq took the wrong key in his greed, and you, my brothers, were too consumed by your own avarice to understand the true value of the knowledge I brought back from the desert. The knowledge you tried to steal, and the mother you left to die." He rubbed the lamp once decisively. The chamber instantly filled with the dense, sulfuric smoke, and the colossal, golden-blue figure of the genie materialized before them. His appearance was swift, terrifying, and overwhelming, filling the palace chamber entirely. Omar and Salim screamed, high visceral sound of pure terror. They fell backwards, scrambling away on the marble floor, witnessing the monumental, undeniable proof of the power Judar commanded. They saw their ruin reflected in the genie's massive, burning eyes. "Master Judar," the jinn boomed, his voice shaking the foundations of the palace. "Your enemies are before you. What is your command?" Judar stood, the master of his destiny, and delivered his final, precise judgment. He recounted their sins, not with passion, but with the cold clarity of history, the theft of the inheritance, the abandonment in the desert, and the final murderous cruelty against Fatima. "I do not wish for your deaths, my brothers," Judar declared, "for I am not a killer, and blood is still blood. But justice requires a punishment that fits your eternal greed and shame." He raised the lamp and gave his final, irrevocable command. "Mighty Jinn, I command you this. Take these two wicked, unrepentant souls, Omar and Salim. Transport them instantly to the remotest desert island, a place that is fertile and safe, but entirely solitary. Provide them with the bare essentials, water, food, and simple tools, but ensure they possess only the ragged clothes on their backs. And finally, I command that they shall never ever see another human being until they can sincerely, truly forgive one another for their shared greed and repent for the crimes committed against their mother and me. Until that day, they are banished to their own company, left to live on the fruits of their solitary hard labor. The genie smiled with satisfaction. The punishment was perfectly tailored to the crime. With a massive silent clap of his hands, Omar and Salim vanished instantly, their screams choked off by the speed of the magical transport, leaving only the scent of sulfur and the memory of their terror in the palace chamber. Judar was finally, completely, and securely free. The departure of Omar and Salim was swift, silent, and absolute. The colossal figure of the genie dissolved, leaving only the scent of magic and the two discarded bludgeons on the marble floor. Judar, the master of the lamp, gently retrieved the weapons, his mind finally at peace. He went directly to his mother, Fatima, explaining the terrifying events with calm reassurance, detailing the justice he had been forced to enact. He emphasized that the banishment was an act of mercy, not vengeance, a final, necessary chance for them to find the true repentance that their hearts had always lacked. Fatima, though initially shocked by the immense power her son commanded, found profound solace in the finality of the act. She realized that Judar had achieved not merely wealth, but absolute security. Her torment was over. She embraced her son, blessing him for the wisdom he had gained through hardship, accepting her new glorious life with quiet, deserved dignity. With his mother's well-being permanently secured, Judar fully embraced his role as al-Gharib, the mysterious and immensely powerful prince of the West. He used the vast, stable fortune granted by the genie not for personal indulgence, but for the true betterment of the city. He never commanded the genie for frivolous things, reserving his wishes for acts of large-scale benevolence. He funded schools, built hospitals for the poor, and sponsored massive irrigation projects that brought life and fertility to arid lands outside Cairo. His palace became a center of wise, subtle governance, and the whispers about his power shifted from fearful speculation to genuine, profound admiration. The people loved their new prince, for he was humble, honest, and his good fortune seemed to bring them only benefit. Judar's life was a testament to the fact that true power resided not in gold or magic, but in an unwavering, virtuous heart. His reputation for fairness and profound wisdom reached the court of the Sultan, who, recognizing Judar's character, offered him the hand of his youngest daughter, a princess known for her beauty and deep spiritual piety. Judar accepted, solidifying his new rightful place in the world. Meanwhile, on a remote, fertile island in the vast ocean, Omar and Salim began their sentence. They had been given only the barest essentials, a freshwater spring, simple seeds, and the tools to work the rich, unyielding earth. They possessed no servants, no gold, and no one to cheat, steal from, or lie to only each other. The adjustment was brutal. They who had scorned work their entire lives were forced to toil daily to earn their meager meals. Their initial months were filled with bitter arguments and mutual recriminations. Omar blamed Salim for the excessive spending. Salim blamed Omar for the failed plots. They tried to escape, building clumsy rafts, only to have them magically dismantled by the remote power of the genie, who ensured the terms of the banishment were strictly met. Slowly, inevitably, the immense solitude and the unyielding necessity of labor began to break the shell of their arrogance. They learned the dignity of true work, realizing that the food they ate was the direct result of their own painful effort, not a gift of chance or theft. More profoundly, they were forced to rely on one another. Omar's strength for felling trees, Salim's patience for planting crops. They began to see their shared suffering as a mirror of their shared sin. After many years of isolation, living a life stripped bare of all the comforts they had coveted, a genuine, fragile thread of mutual repentance began to weave itself into their hearts. They realized the true magnitude of the betrayal against their mother and the saintly forgiveness of their brother. Back in Cairo, many glorious years passed. Judar's palace stood as a beacon of prosperity and justice. One quiet evening, Judar, now a respected and powerful vizier, sat with his beautiful wife and his beloved aged mother, Fatima. He held the ancient brass lamp in his hands, reflecting on the fate of his brothers and the power he commanded. He knew that the lamp contained immense, unpredictable power, and he had one final, profound obligation to his people and his legacy. He summoned the genie one last time. "Mighty Jinn," Judar commanded, "I thank you for your service, which has brought justice and security. My final command to you is this: you shall cease your service to me and all my descendants. You shall place this lamp back into the sealed vault, ensuring that the ancient magic is never again used for the corrupt desires of man. You shall guard the treasure and its power for eternity, allowing it to be found only by a soul as pure and humble as I was when I first found it." The genie smiled, a look of immense satisfaction. "Your wisdom surpasses that of all kings, Master Judar. You choose virtue over perpetual power. Your wish is my final command." With a final, glorious flash, the genie vanished forever, carrying the lamp back to the sealed vault in the distant desert. Judar's reign continued, secured now not by magic, but by his own enduring wisdom, virtue, and the love of his people. He ruled justly and lived happily until the end of his days, the enduring tale of Judar and his brothers becoming a timeless, magnificent legend in the 1001 Nights of Cairo. And thus, dear friends, we arrive at the end of the tale of Judar and his brothers, an eternal story that reminds us of the greatest lesson from 1001 Nights. The true treasure is not found in piles of gold or jewels, but in the purity of the heart and the sincerity of one's intentions. While the sin of greed led Judar's two brothers to ruin and eternal regret, the virtue of selflessness and patience guided Judar to discover an invincible power, allowing him to achieve justice and secure happiness for those he loved. The ethics of the honest merchant triumphed over the schemes of sorcerers and the deceit of family. I now wish you all a peaceful and deep sleep and sweet dreams filled with goodness and tranquility. Always remember that the stories of 1001 Nights never truly end. Join us for the next evening's tale for more amazing adventures and thrilling secrets. Good night.